The once beautiful Rose Castle now lay in complete ruin, filled with fire, blood, and chaos, as members of the Ragnar clan were slaughtered without mercy from every direction. In the middle of that madness stood Theo, the young lord of the Ragnar clan, desperately trying to hold his ground against an unknown enemy faction. This wasn't just a random attack, it was a full-scale internal conflict, a brutal battle for the throne between different houses of the Ragnar clan. Yet Theo still had no idea which house had betrayed him. The Ragnar clan wasn't just any noble family, it was part of a grand ducal lineage guarding the northernmost edge of the empire for over 1,000 years. Their strength came from a unique constitution believed to be inherited from dragon blood, granting every member exceptional magical power, stamina, and natural talent with the sword. But Theo, the bastard heir, was the one exception, born without the overwhelming talent that defined his bloodline, making him an outcast in his own family. Facing him now was his opponent, a masked figure who had infiltrated Rose Castle, someone Theo hadn't yet recognized. The man mocked him relentlessly, calling him a worthless fool who brought shame to the prestigious Ragnar name. Then, as the mask came off, Theo's eyes widened in shock as the truth hit him hard. It was Rendon, his own instructor and sword tutor, the one who had guided him all this time. Rendon laughed coldly, saying he had watched Theo train every morning despite having no talent, calling it a pitiful sight because no amount of effort would ever change his useless nature. Theo gritted his teeth, furious, but unable to deny the years of struggle that never paid off. He shouted back, accusing Rendon of infiltrating the castle just to teach him meaningless techniques, before betraying him. Annoyed by the defiance, Rendon swung his sword without hesitation and cut off Theo's arm, leaving him screaming as blood poured out before collapsing to the ground. Rendon grabbed him by the head and lifted him up, forcing him to look at the burning castle while telling him everything happening was his fault. Every death, every scream, every bit of destruction existed because Theo was too weak to stop it. As if that wasn't enough, another man dragged Theo's mother's lifeless body across the ground and dropped it in front of him. Rendon coldly stated that her death was also his fault, emphasizing that in a clan full of powerful warriors, Theo was the only useless trash. Completely shattered, Theo made one last desperate attempt to fight back, grabbing his sword and charging forward. But before he could even reach Rendon, a blade flew through the air and pierced straight through his body, throwing him several meters away. The one who launched the attack complained impatiently, telling Rendon to stop dragging things out and just finish him already. Rendon casually apologized, saying he got carried away reminiscing with his disciple. As Theo lay there dying, he felt everything around him fading away, his vision blurring as his life slipped through his fingers. In his final moments, he thought about how pathetic his life had been, how no matter how hard he tried, he was always powerless, always lacking talent. But just as it seemed like everything had ended, a system window appeared, announcing that his death had triggered a special trait and that he would be sent back to a regression point. Theo opened his eyes again, and the first thing he saw was Rendon standing right in front of him, and found himself in the middle of sword training. Rendon snapped at Theo, trying to pull him back to reality after noticing how absent-minded he was acting. But Theo still had absolutely no idea what was going on, and couldn't make sense of the situation at all. He wondered if he was experiencing some kind of flashback from his past, and out of all the memories he could have revisited, he couldn't believe the face in front of him was Rendon's annoying one, making it feel like the universe was playing a cruel joke on him. Suddenly, a strange system window appeared right in front of his eyes, and Theo just stared at it blankly, completely confused by what he was seeing. The message instructed him to punch Rendon in the face as part of a tutorial quest, which only made Theo even more confused about what the hell was happening. He questioned whether this was really how flashbacks were supposed to work, because none of this made any sense. And then he noticed something even stranger. Rendon couldn't see the system window at all. That detail alone made Theo pause for a moment, but instead of overthinking it, he decided not to complain. Without hesitation, he dropped his training stick, clenched his fist tightly, and gathered all the strength he could before throwing a solid punch straight at Rendon's face. The impact landed cleanly, but strangely, there was no visible reaction from Rendon at first, as if he couldn't even process what Theo was trying to do. Meanwhile, Theo smirked slightly, thinking to himself how unbelievably real everything felt, like this wasn't just some illusion or memory. That brief moment didn't last long, because Rendon's expression quickly shifted into anger, and he immediately retaliated with a powerful strike that sent Theo crashing backward. Theo felt the pain vividly, and got annoyed, thinking that even in a supposed flashback, he still had to deal with this kind of suffering. Rendon let out a sigh and spoke coldly, saying he understood Theo might be frustrated, especially with the awakening ceremony approaching and his lack of improvement, but he made it clear that he would never tolerate a student raising their hand against their master. Hearing the mention of the awakening ceremony completely shocked Theo, because that event had taken place nearly 10 years before his death, which didn't align with the idea of a simple flashback. Rendon continued to criticize his behavior before turning away, stating that he would see him at the next lesson, leaving Theo behind. Around him, The other trainees began whispering and laughing quietly, mocking him as a hopeless fool who blamed others despite being completely talentless. As their insults continued, something finally started to click in Theo's mind, and he crouched down, scratching the ground beneath him, clearly feeling its texture through his fingers. He then looked at the injury Rendon had just inflicted and felt the pain coursing through his body with perfect clarity, which made the truth hit him all at once. This wasn't just a flashback. He had actually gone back in time to when he was 17 years old, 10 years before everything ended. Right on cue, another system window appeared, congratulating him for successfully completing the tutorial quest, and as a reward, something called Ragnar's talent had been activated. The system asked if he wanted to accept the reward, and without any hesitation, Theo selected yes immediately. A surge of arcane energy shimmered within his chest as the system confirmed the reward had been granted, stating that all his stats would now grow at an extraordinary rate. Meanwhile, back at the Rose Palace, Rendon was calmly sitting and drinking tea with Theo's mother, reporting to her that he had never seen anyone as talentless as her son. However, right after saying that, he smiled broadly and added that it was exactly the reason he had taken this role, claiming that as a true teacher, he would do everything possible to make Theo strong enough before the awakening ceremony in 5 months. Theo's mother, Cecilia Ragnar, listened calmly and said she would leave everything in Rendon's hands, trusting his ability completely. She then handed him a pouch filled with gold coins, asking him to pay extra attention to Theo. The man accepted the money without hesitation and assured her she had nothing to worry about, while Cecilia responded with confidence that she wasn't worried at all because she believed in her son. Later, Rendon walked down the corridor with the bag of gold coins in his hand, grinning shamelessly as he enjoyed the thought of getting paid such a ridiculous amount just to teach Theo absolutely nothing. He mocked them in his mind, thinking both mother and son were complete idiots because not only was he earning money from the Ragnar family, but he was also receiving rewards from his real master for leaking Theo's secrets and sabotaging his growth from the inside. For him, this was a perfect opportunity he had never experienced before, profiting from both sides while doing absolutely nothing honestly. At the same time, Theo was sprinting through the corridor at full speed, moving so fast that he passed right by Rendon in a blur, barely even noticing him. Rendon scoffed as he watched him rush past, calling him an idiotic loser under his breath, completely unaware of what had changed. Theo, however, had only one goal in mind, and that was to reach his mother as quickly as possible. As he approached her, he called out desperately, and the moment she turned around, she saw him standing there, completely out of breath. Without saying a single word, Theo rushed forward and hugged her tightly, breaking down into tears as the overwhelming emotion of seeing her alive hit him all at once. That moment alone confirmed everything for him. This wasn't a dream or a hallucination. He had truly returned 10 years into the past. The painful memory of Rendon forcing him to watch his mother's lifeless body flashed in his mind. But now, seeing her alive right in front of him filled him with genuine happiness. At that moment, Theo made up his mind completely. He would change the future no matter what. If that mysterious system was real, then with Ragnar's talent now activated, he believed he could grow stronger. This time, he would have enough power to survive the brutal war for the throne. And more importantly, he would become strong enough to take revenge on that filthy bastard Rendon. Soon after, the second tutorial quest appeared, instructing Theo to train his body to its absolute limit. It was still early morning. The sun hadn't even risen yet, but Theo was already pushing himself relentlessly, fueled by nothing but revenge and determination. He knew that if he wanted to survive what was coming, he needed to become stronger immediately. In his previous life, Theo had been part of an intelligence organization known as Black Snow, but he was stuck doing information work and never given important roles because he lacked combat ability. Now, he realized that the knowledge he gathered back then could actually be useful in this life. One crucial piece of information he remembered was a powerful enhancement potion known as the Bloody Sword Emperor Elixir, whose true value would only be revealed later through hidden manuals. He also recalled the intense training methods he had once abandoned due to his lack of talent, but now things were different. With Ragnar's talent awakened, he believed that effort would finally translate into real strength. As he trained, his face twisted with excitement when he noticed his running speed increasing, and the system window displayed his progress clearly in real time. Other trainees began gathering in the training hall, and they were completely baffled seeing Theo run without getting tired, wondering if he had always been this physically capable. After that, Theo moved on to sword practice, and he could clearly feel that his swings were faster and more precise than before. Days passed, and one night, he was still training without rest, pushing his body far beyond normal limits. That was when the training ground manager, Evelyn Nereville, noticed him, yawning tiredly as she observed his relentless effort. She began to question whether he was truly the talentless fool everyone claimed him to be, because what she was seeing didn't match that description at all. Meanwhile, Theo's body was on the verge of collapse, exhaustion hitting him hard, but the rising progress bar kept him going. Just the night before, he had reached 90% completion, but the moment he paused to rest even briefly, it dropped back to 89%. That single setback pushed him into an almost obsessive state, forcing him to continue training without allowing himself any breaks. Now, he had reached 98%, and knowing he was so close, he pushed himself even harder, increasing his speed, despite his body screaming in pain. After one final burst of effort, he was barely able to breathe, completely drained, yet there was still 1% left. Somehow, through sheer willpower, he forced himself to continue, pushing past his limits until finally, the number he had been chasing appeared in front of him. The system immediately congratulated him for completing the tutorial quest, and announced that he had obtained the dragon heart as a reward. However, before he could even read the full details, his body gave out completely, and he collapsed from exhaustion. The system window hovered above him, asking whether he wanted to claim the reward. With trembling hands, he barely managed to lift his finger and press yes. The moment he accepted it, a blue light engulfed his entire body, and Evelyn watched in complete disbelief as Theo underwent a transformation right in front of her eyes. A while later, Theo woke up inside a quiet room, slowly opening his eyes and scanning his surroundings in confusion before Evelyn appeared beside him, calmly explaining that he was in the break room of Training Ground 4 and reminding him there was no need to push himself that hard during training. The moment Theo saw her, he recognized her instantly, which caught her off guard since she didn't expect him to remember her, so she introduced herself properly as Evelyn Nereville, the manager of the 4th training ground, and explained that he had collapsed earlier while training alone, so she carried him here to rest. Theo thanked her politely for helping him, and she handed him water while casually reminding him that within the Ragnar clan, opening one's mana hall before the official awakening ceremony was strictly forbidden. Theo didn't understand why she suddenly brought that up, but he nodded anyway, saying he was aware of the rule, though that only made her question him further as she asked why he broke it. Still confused, Theo asked why she was interrogating him like this, and that was when her expression hardened as she explained that right before he lost consciousness, she sensed a mana wave identical to someone opening a mana hall, then demanded to know directly if he had done it. Theo was completely lost at first, unable to understand what she meant, but then the memory of what happened before he fainted suddenly came back to him, and everything clicked together in his mind. He remembered receiving the dragon heart as a reward, and on top of that, gaining the magical power equivalent of 10 past lives as a bonus for clearing the quest early, which left him stunned because something like a dragon heart wasn't something anyone could obtain easily. A dragon heart was special because it could house a mana hall within itself, allowing it to function far more efficiently than a normal one, but humans were never able to do that, since their hearts couldn't withstand that level of power, so they usually formed their mana halls in the lower abdomen instead. That was why warriors, especially those from the Ragnar clan, coveted dragon hearts so much, because it was the fastest way to gain overwhelming power without relying on the standard method. However, no human had ever overcome that limitation before, which meant Theo's current situation was extremely dangerous, because while the reward was absurdly powerful, it also placed him in serious risk if discovered. To make things worse, the person in front of him was Evelyn Nereville, a former high-ranking swordswoman who had lost her left arm and retired to become a training ground manager. But she was still incredibly dangerous. She had once commanded the white-armored dragon cavalry, and her skills were so exceptional that even a demon dragon respected her, while her personality was built on strict principles, meaning she had zero tolerance for dishonesty or cowardice. She didn't care about status or lineage, and in the past, she had even stepped down from being Theo's instructor because she found him lacking. If she discovered the truth about his dragon heart and mana hall, there was a real chance he could lose his head on the spot. Despite all that, Theo smiled slightly, because he already had a plan, knowing that as long as he didn't get caught, everything would be fine. Instead of panicking, he responded with a sharp remark, questioning how she could talk about executing him based purely on her assumptions, and asking if she was prepared to deal with the consequences of making such accusations. His words caught her off guard, leaving her momentarily silent, unable to respond immediately. Theo pressed further, reminding her that he was still an heir of the Ragnar clan, and if her suspicions turned out to be false, it would be considered an insult to the clan itself. She acknowledged that he was right, and admitted those were indeed the rules. But Theo didn't stop there, leaning into the pressure as he asked if she knew the punishment for humiliating a Ragnar heir. Without hesitation, she answered that it was execution, which made Theo nod in satisfaction before telling her to think carefully before speaking next time. Evelyn was visibly shaken by this sudden change in his attitude, wondering if this was really the same person she had known before, but despite that, she was still convinced that what she sensed earlier was definitely a mana wave, so she decided to confirm it herself. Even if he belonged to the Ragnar bloodline, rules were rules, and she intended to enforce them properly, so she examined him closely, only to realize that there was no visible mana hall present at all. Her expression shifted instantly as doubt crept in, making her realize she might have been mistaken. Theo, now feeling confident, asked if she was satisfied with what she saw, and in response, she immediately dropped to her knees at his feet without hesitation, bowing deeply and asking him to execute her for her mistake, claiming she would pay for her sin with her life. As she lowered her head further, Theo revealed internally that a dragon heart functioned differently from a normal mana hall, since it was essentially a freely controllable core, allowing him to hide its presence completely at will. On top of that, the knowledge that humans could even possess a dragon heart wouldn't be discovered until years later, which meant no one could accuse him of something they didn't even know existed. interested. Instead of accepting her life, Theo gently placed his hand on her back and told her there was no need for such drastic actions, then turned and walked away, saying she had simply done her duty and that not many people would risk their lives to uphold the truth against someone of his status, which he respected about her. However, the real reason he spared her was far more practical, since she was one of the strongest individuals around, and keeping her alive would benefit him in the future. Before leaving completely, he explained that the rule about not opening mana halls before the awakening ceremony existed to prevent dangerous mana overflow, and added that he appreciated her concern even for someone like him, a bastard of the Ragnar clan, then left her sitting there quietly, still processing everything that had just happened. A few days later, Theo found himself dealing with that same annoying bastard again, with Rendon yelling non-stop and ordering him to swing his sword slightly more to the right while continuing his usual stream of insults. Theo was deliberately pretending to be weak, but honestly, listening to this guy's constant yapping was getting harder by the second, especially since every word out of his mouth was pure garbage. At the same time, Theo began noticing something off. Rendon wasn't just being useless. He was intentionally teaching strange and flawed sword techniques, which made Theo even more certain that this guy wasn't acting alone. Someone else had to be pulling the strings behind him, and Theo was convinced that the one who dealt the final blow in his previous life was the real mastermind behind all of this. With that thought, a smirk slowly appeared on Theo's face as he figured out exactly what he needed to do next. Meanwhile, Rendon kept barking orders like a broken machine, completely unaware of what was coming, until Theo suddenly snapped the wooden training stick in half without warning. That single act immediately shut the atmosphere down, as Theo finally spoke up, saying he couldn't tolerate listening to this trash any longer because every lesson he gave was completely useless. He didn't stop there either, going straight for the throat by asking how someone like Rendon even managed to become a mid-rank swordsman with skills that pathetic, then adding that he would probably struggle even against basic demonic beasts. Of course, that was more than enough to trigger Rendon, who instantly lost his composure and started fuming with rage, but Theo didn't back down in the slightest. Instead, he walked straight toward him and doubled down on the insults, making it absolutely clear that he considered Rendon nothing more than a fraud with garbage-level ability. What Theo was doing here wasn't random at all. His plan was simple: provoke Rendon enough to force him into resigning or making a reckless move. And if things escalated badly, Theo was certain this guy would contact whoever was backing him, which would finally expose the real mastermind behind everything. The scene then shifted to the Camellia Palace, where a loud guy burst into a pub with a huge grin, clearly excited as he shouted out that the bastard heir of Ragnar was going to duel his own master next week. Sitting there quietly was the man he was addressing, Axion, who didn't even react properly at first, unable to lift his glass as he listened. Meanwhile, the loudmouth kept running his mouth, going on about how Theo had the nerve to blame his instructor for his lack of talent and confidently predicting that Theo would end up crippled after the duel. Before he could continue any further, the glass Axion was holding suddenly smashed straight into his face, knocking him out instantly with a single brutal hit. Axion clearly didn't care about the situation itself, stating coldly that it didn't matter if some useless bastard ended up half dead. After all, to him, Theo was just another Ragnar, and not even a notable one at that. Axion Ragnar, known as the Dark Tiger and one of the four hounds of the North, had no reason to care about someone like him. Standing nearby was another powerful figure, Remington Narcio, also one of the four hounds, known as the Silver Lion, silently observing the situation. Just then, another man entered, Ed Troyven, the Nine-Dragon Sky Dragon, and unlike the others, he looked visibly concerned. He warned that things could go wrong if they underestimated the situation, suggesting that letting their guard down might lead to unexpected consequences. Axion dismissed the concern immediately, saying that kind of risk only applied to people with actual talent, and since Theo was nothing more than a brainless nobody, there was no reason to worry about him. But Ed didn't agree so easily, pointing out that when it came to the Ragnar clan, even the smallest possibility could lead to something unprecedented. Axion, however, simply brushed it off again, saying that Theo picking a fight with Rendon was actually a good thing, because it meant the instructor would deal with him personally, and there was no way Theo could handle someone like that anyway. A week later, Training Ground 4 was packed with people, and it wasn't just regular clan members either. Even high-ranking figures and influential spectators had gathered to witness the upcoming duel. Standing in the arena, Theo looked visibly tense under the watchful eyes of hundreds, cursing himself internally as he remembered how all he originally wanted was to get Rendon fired after humiliating him. But now things had spiraled way out of control. Still, despite the situation, he wasn't entirely shaken because this outcome was somewhat expected, and deep down, he was burning with the desire to get revenge on Rendon. Right then, a system notification appeared, confirming that his third tutorial quest was to fight Rendon and win, leaving no room for backing out anymore. The scene briefly flashed back to when Theo had confronted Rendon earlier, boldly declaring that he was fired and should get lost immediately. Rendon had tried to argue back, insisting there was still time left on his contract, but Theo shut him down by stating that once the employer dismisses him, the contract no longer matters, ending the discussion completely. Although Theo had wanted to punch him right then and there, he hesitated because he wasn't fully confident in his strength yet, while Rendon, on the other hand, couldn't afford to lose his position since he hadn't completed his real mission. As he stepped closer, trying to convince Theo to reconsider, a system window suddenly appeared again, stating clearly that Theo must fight and defeat Rendon, catching him completely off guard. At that exact moment, Evelyn stepped in and proposed settling the matter the traditional Ragnar way, which followed the law of the strong, meaning a sword duel would decide everything without needing any formal judgment. Whoever won would have the final say, making the result absolute. Rendon instantly seized the opportunity, agreeing enthusiastically and calling it a perfect solution, while Theo stood there uncertain, unsure if he was ready for something like this. Evelyn continued pushing the idea, clearly believing it was the best course of action, leaving Theo with no real way to refuse, and eventually, he found himself standing face to face with Rendon in the arena. Around them, the crowd whispered among themselves, mocking Theo openly as they talked about how pathetic he was, saying he barely knew how to handle a sword and that there was no way he could win against a mid-rank swordsman. Many were already convinced he would end up crippled by the end of the match. Rendon, full of confidence, smirked and told Theo that if he apologized now, he would pretend none of this ever happened, implying there was no need for him to throw his life away over pride. Theo, however, didn't back down at all, firing back immediately and telling Rendon that he should be the one apologizing instead. He warned him coldly that if he didn't want to end up as a one-armed swordsman, it would be better to accept being fired and leave quietly while he still had the chance. Rendon's grin only widened at that response, clearly thinking this entire situation was already under his control. In his mind, this was the perfect chance to kill Theo and make it look like an accident during the duel, eliminating him without raising suspicion. As the fight officially began, Rendon calmly invited Theo to attack first, offering him the first move as his so-called teacher. Theo didn't hesitate and charged forward with his sword raised, and the moment the spectators saw him rushing in so recklessly, they were stunned, unable to believe how clueless he looked, like someone who didn't even know the basics of swordsmanship. Rendon responded with a series of precise strikes, but surprisingly, Theo managed to block and defend against them, holding his ground despite the pressure. Rendon continued attacking relentlessly, pushing Theo back step by step as he cornered him, thinking this was exactly how things should play out. In his mind, Theo wasn't even at the level of a proper swordsman. He was still just an apprentice, far below his own rank. While he admitted that Theo's movements seemed slightly improved compared to before, he believed it still wasn't anywhere near enough to challenge him. To Rendon, the outcome was already decided. Unless Theo somehow reached the level of the Four Hounds of the North, which he considered impossible, there was no way this so-called talentless heir of the Ragnar clan could ever defeat him. The scene shifted to a few days earlier, where Theo turned toward Evelyn and questioned what she was thinking when she suggested something as extreme as a duel. Clearly confused by her decision, she responded calmly, saying she was trying to help him, explaining that if he truly wanted to remove Rendon, he needed to approach it strategically instead of acting impulsively. She made it clear that she strongly believed Rendon had someone backing him, so simply firing him wouldn't solve the real problem at all. Theo asked how she could be so sure about that, and she replied that it was obvious from the way Rendon had been teaching him such a bizarre and flawed sword style, which raised immediate suspicion. She revealed that she had already ordered someone to investigate him in secret, which left Theo genuinely surprised, because in his previous life, she had never gone that far. Yet now she was actively trying to expose him, all because he had caught her attention during the Manhwa incident. She continued explaining that the investigation traced all of Rendon's connections back to Camellia Palace, which didn't shock Theo at all, since he had already suspected something like this. Instead, what annoyed him was the realization that everything tied back to the same miserable war for the throne, dragging him into it once again. Still, he pushed that frustration aside quickly, and admitted it was impressive she managed to deduce that much information. Then he got serious and told her that with his current level of skill, he wasn't confident he could defeat Rendon yet, asking her what she intended to do about it. Evelyn didn't hesitate and told him directly that he could win, urging him to stop underestimating his own potential, because she clearly saw something in him he hadn't fully realized yet. Back in the present fight, Rendon kept launching attack after attack, but Theo deflected every single strike smoothly, making it look almost effortless. This completely confused Rendon, who couldn't understand how this brat in front of him was no longer the same Theo Ragnar he used to bully so easily. The momentum had completely shifted, and now it was Rendon who was struggling to keep up, while the tension in the arena grew heavier as the spectators began sensing that something was wrong. Among the crowd, Remington watched the fight closely, clearly impressed by what he was seeing, while Evelyn observed everything with a faint smile, almost enjoying the situation as if she had expected this outcome all along. The scene briefly shifted again to reveal that over the past week, Evelyn herself had been training Theo personally in secret, even though she admitted it technically broke the rules for her to do so. She didn't care about that at all, stating bluntly that someone like Rendon didn't deserve to be a teacher in the first place. Hearing this, Theo couldn't couldn't help but smirk, feeling both excited and strangely satisfied, thinking that gaining Evelyn's support like this was completely worth it. Still, there was something bothering him, so he asked her what her real reason was for going this far to help him. She admitted that the Manhwa incident played a role in her decision, but also added that there was someone she knew who would likely take interest in Theo, someone obsessed with collecting talented individuals. Returning to the present, the fight continued, as Rendon grew increasingly desperate, starting to suspect that Theo had been pretending to be weak all along. In the middle of the battle, Theo suddenly asked him directly who was backing him, which immediately provoked Rendon into lashing out and questioning what he meant by that. Theo didn't back down and reminded him that he already knew about the deliberately flawed training, then bluntly asked if he was working with Camellia Palace. That single question froze Rendon for a moment, and his reaction alone was enough to confirm everything for Theo. Without wasting another second, Theo moved instantly and swung his sword, slicing clean through Rendon's arm and severing it completely. The detached hand flew through the air, shocking the entire crowd as Rendon screamed in pain, cursing under his breath. Theo walked forward confidently, finally feeling the difference in his strength, and reminded Rendon of the words he had once said to him in his previous life, about everything being his fault for being weak and talentless. With a cold expression, Theo threw those same words back at him, declaring that Rendon was the weakest one here now, and that under Ragnar's rule of strength, someone like him had no place standing in that arena. Then, with one final decisive swing, Theo brought his sword down and severed Rendon's head completely, sending it rolling across the ground as blood splattered everywhere. Immediately after, a system window appeared, congratulating Theo for completing Tutorial Quest 3 successfully, while also noting that he had exceeded expectations and earned a bonus reward. The system then asked if he wanted to claim it right away, and considering everything up to this point, the answer was already obvious. The entire crowd was left completely stunned, unable to process what they had just witnessed as an apprentice swordsman casually slaughtered a mid-tier swordsman in front of them. It was something that simply shouldn't have been possible, and yet it had happened so cleanly that it left everyone speechless. Meanwhile, Theo stood there feeling nothing but embarrassment, thinking that this old bastard had been ridiculously weak all along, and it was honestly humiliating that in his previous life he had suffered at the hands of someone like that. Still, he acknowledged that things were completely different now, and this time, he wasn't the same powerless fool anymore. Right then, a system window appeared, informing him that the ability called Observation had been activated as a reward, and on top of that, he had also gained 1 full year's worth of magic power as a bonus. But before he could even process that properly, something crashed down from the sky like a literal meteor, slamming into the ground with overwhelming force and shaking the entire area. Theo barely had time to react before the man shouted his name with a wide grin on his face. The figure standing before him was none other than Julius Ragnar, the demon dragon and the commander of the white-armored dragon cavalry, and the moment Theo realized who it was, he was completely stunned. He couldn't believe that someone of this level was standing right in front of him, and immediately started wondering how long this man had been watching the fight unfold. Around them, the crowd completely lost their composure, panicking and whispering frantically as they recognized the commander, unable to understand why someone of his status had appeared here at all. At the same time, Evelyn looked absolutely devastated as she stared at the destroyed ground, clearly frustrated that he had wrecked the training field with his dramatic entrance. Meanwhile, Julius himself radiated overwhelming presence, looking like a beast in human form, and his intimidating aura made Theo sweat slightly, unsure of how to even respond. But that tension didn't last long because Julius suddenly burst into laughter, his mood completely different from what his appearance suggested. He began patting Theo on the shoulder repeatedly, though those so-called gentle pats were anything but gentle, and commented that he was genuinely surprised to see someone carrying this level of talent. He casually added that killing one's own teacher might be considered disrespectful, but openly admitted that Rendon had deserved it anyway, before laughing loudly again. Without hesitation, he extended an invitation, asking Theo to join the white-armored dragon cavalry right then and there. Evelyn didn't look surprised at all, as if she had already expected this outcome, but the rest of the crowd was completely shaken, unable to believe what they were hearing. The idea that someone like Julius Ragnar would personally recruit an inexperienced apprentice who hadn't even gone through the awakening ceremony was beyond absurd to them. Among the spectators, Remington appeared once again, calmly asking someone nearby if they had ever heard of a case where an apprentice swordsman was scouted like this before. The man hesitated and admitted he had never heard of such a thing, which only confirmed what Remington already knew. It had never happened in the entire history of their world. Meanwhile, Theo remained calm as his thoughts ran deeper, understanding that it was impossible to fully judge someone's potential while their mana hall remained closed. Even if his swordsmanship had improved, his magical power could still be lacking, so, logically, even someone like Julius shouldn't be able to determine his true potential yet. Still, a part of him wondered if the demon dragon possessed some ability to see beyond that limitation. Despite all that, Theo didn't hesitate for even a second and flatly refused the offer, his expression completely steady without showing any doubt or hesitation. Julius froze slightly, looking like he had just bitten into something sour, clearly not expecting that response at all. Even Evelyn dropped her cigar in confusion. The entire crowd was left in shock once again, staring at Theo in disbelief as he casually rejected such an overwhelming opportunity. For a brief moment, complete silence filled the training ground as everyone struggled to process what had just happened. As the day went on, news of the incident spread like wildfire throughout the Ragnar clan, and everyone was talking about how Theo, the so-called imbecile, had completely destroyed his own teacher in a duel. On top of that, what shocked people even more was that when the demon dragon personally tried to recruit him into the white-armored dragon cavalry, Theo had outright refused the offer without hesitation. This split opinions across the clan, with some thinking he was being humble, while others believed he was just acting arrogant beyond his place. The scene then shifted to Camellia Palace, where a furious woman stood, clearly displeased that everything had gone off track after Rendon's death. She was Emil Ragnar, the lady of Camellia Palace, and her frustration was obvious. A man stepped forward to calm her down, telling her not to worry since Rendon was nothing more than a disposable piece, a low-level pawn assigned because of his lack of real skill. She dismissed that explanation, saying his death itself wasn't the issue, and the man speaking to her was revealed to be her brother, Ed Troyven, the same one seen earlier at the pub. Emil explained that the real problem was that the demon dragon had personally approached Theo, and rumors were spreading that Evelyn had influenced that decision, which complicated things further. This meant they could no longer interfere by assigning Theo a new instructor, cutting off one of their main methods of control. If Theo continued to gain attention, it would become increasingly difficult to seize control of the Rose Palace without drawing suspicion. At that moment, Axion entered casually, questioning why they were so tense over this situation, acting like it wasn't a big deal at all. He reassured them that there was no way the clan head would take interest in something like this, so their plan could continue as intended without disruption. Emil immediately challenged that attitude, reminding him that their entire strategy depended on Theo remaining weak and insignificant, since that was the only way to take over the Rose Palace without offending the clan leader. Axion acknowledged her point, but remained completely confident, stating that Theo was still powerless no matter what had happened recently, because someone like him couldn't have changed that much in such a short time. He believed that Evelyn and the demon dragon had always been drawn to underdogs, so there was no need to overreact to this situation. However, Ed wasn't convinced at all, and warned him not to underestimate the situation or treat it so lightly. In response, Axion pulled out a letter with a sly grin and said that if they were so worried, he would personally deal with Theo, treating it like a game and reminding him of his place in the hierarchy. Later, the scene shifted back to the training grounds, where Evelyn praised Theo for his performance during practice, acknowledging that he had done well. Theo thanked her sincerely, saying that learning under a proper master like her felt completely different compared to before. She then brought up the topic of the white-armored dragon cavalry again, mentioning that it might have been better for him to accept the offer, and asking why he turned it down. Theo paused to think, realizing that in his previous life, joining that elite force had been his dream, and rejecting it now wasn't something he could honestly say he didn't regret. However, he understood that accepting it at this stage would limit his growth, since he had much bigger goals this time. Compared to the advantages he could gain by rising to the top after the awakening ceremony, joining the cavalry right now didn't seem nearly as valuable. So instead, he simply smiled and said he didn't want to rely on special treatment, adding that he still felt unprepared and preferred to continue training for the awakening ceremony. Evelyn responded by pointing out that the commander would likely be disappointed after being rejected so directly, which made Theo think further. At that moment, he decided to test his observation skill for the first time, activating it and reading Evelyn's stats instantly, confirming that she was indeed a high-ranking swordswoman. Alongside that, he could see her thoughts and emotions, learning that she admired his humility and character, and that teaching him gave her a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in a long time. He also noticed something unexpected, a lingering feeling of nostalgia, as she clearly missed her time with the white-armored dragon cavalry. Theo was genuinely impressed by how useful this ability was, realizing it gave him access to information far beyond normal perception. As he focused on that final detail about Evelyn missing the cavalry, he found it particularly interesting, which made him think more deeply about her motivations. Just then, another man entered the scene and introduced himself as Sybil Drea, stating that he had come from the Southern Inspection Post and had something important to discuss with Theo. Theo didn't know what this was about, so he immediately activated observation again to gather more information. This time, the result made him uneasy, as he discovered that Sybil had a strong desire to spar with him, which instantly made Theo nervous. The thought of fighting someone with such an intense, lustful aura made him sweat. Right on cue, a system notification appeared once again, revealing the 4th tutorial quest. The objective was to discard the title of Ragnar's imbecile, and the progress bar showed that he had already reached nearly 28% completion. Sybil stepped forward and openly declared that he wanted to follow young Master Theo, admitting without hesitation that he had once been among those who ignored him as nothing more than an untalented failure. He confessed confessed that he genuinely believed the title of Ragnar's imbecile suited him perfectly back then, and while Theo appreciated the honesty, he couldn't help feeling slightly irritated because the guy was basically insulting him without even realizing it. Sybil continued, explaining that his opinion had changed after learning that Theo trained every single morning harder than anyone else, showing relentless effort despite his reputation. What truly changed his perspective, however, was witnessing the duel against that fraud Rendon, where he had watched the instructor's head fly through the air in a moment that completely stunned him. Seeing Theo's growth with his own eyes left a deep impression, and the image of the demon dragon Julius Ragnar personally inviting Theo to the white-armored dragon cavalry had burned itself into his memory. From that moment onward, Sybil declared that Theo had become his idol, explaining that he himself had once been labeled the idiot of the Southern Inspection Office and had nearly given up on his own path. But after seeing Theo rise like that, something inside him changed, and now all he wanted was a chance to cross swords with the person who inspired him. His words were blunt and completely genuine, which caught Theo off guard because he was usually suspicious of people's intentions. However, after using observation, he could clearly see that Sybil's respect was real and that his only desire was to spar, nothing more. It was unexpected, but Theo felt pleased, realizing that instead of just attracting jealous challengers after defeating Rendon and gaining Julius's attention, there were also people who genuinely admired him and wanted to stand by his side. That meant there were still individuals within Ragnar who carried true pride, and this worked perfectly in his favor since he would need capable and trustworthy people around him if he intended to become the clan head in the future. On top of that, he could use this situation to push forward his current objective of discarding the humiliating title of imbecile, something he had never been able to escape in his past life. Determined to move forward, Theo turned to Evelyn and asked for permission to spar, and she agreed immediately, encouraging him to showcase his abilities properly. Theo raised his blade in salute and formally introduced himself as Theo Ragnar, an apprentice swordsman of the Rose Palace, preparing for the awakening ceremony under the guidance of Evelyn Narraville. Sybil awkwardly returned the salute and introduced himself as an apprentice swordsman from the Southern Inspection Post, mentioning that he inherited the quick sword style of the Kure clan. As soon as the spar began, Sybil launched forward explosively, charging like a madman, aiming to end the fight instantly. Theo met the attack head-on, blocking it cleanly as sparks flew from the clash of their blades. Sybil's speed was undeniable, clearly his greatest strength, and from that first exchange alone, he realized that Theo's skill was absolutely real. Meanwhile, Theo couldn't help but wonder why someone this capable had been labeled an idiot, since in his previous life, he wouldn't have lasted even a few exchanges against someone like this. But things were different now, and Theo quickly went on the offensive, swinging his sword with overwhelming force that sent Sybil flying backward like a rag doll, knocking the weapon right out of his hands. For Theo's current level, this was easy as fuck. Meanwhile, Sybil nearly vomited from the impact that struck his solar plexus before crashing into the training stands. Fortunately, he wasn't seriously injured, and after struggling to get back on his feet, he immediately praised Theo's swordsmanship and conceded defeat without hesitation, showing genuine respect. Theo maintained his composure, returning the salute and acknowledging it as a good fight, carrying himself with calm confidence. As he held his sword up, he caught his own reflection in the polished blade, which suddenly gave him an idea. He activated observation on himself and discovered that it worked just as effectively, revealing his own status in detail. His talents included observation, player, Ragnar, and several others that were still locked, hinting at future potential. He saw that he was currently a level 1 swordsman with balanced stats, but what stood out the most was his abnormally high magic power, reaching 190 points. Now that he could view his stats numerically, everything became clearer, and he realized that completing more quests would unlock additional talent slots, giving him even more abilities in the future. He quickly figured that his high magic power likely came from the combination of his past life's accumulated strength and the dragon heart within him. However, one detail immediately annoyed him. His luck stat was sitting at -49, which looked absolutely terrible. He couldn't help but think that all the misfortune he suffered in his previous life might have been tied to this cursed stat, and he made a mental note to find a way to improve it as soon as possible. While he was busy analyzing his own abilities, Theo failed to notice that a group of young swordsmen had gathered around him, forming a loose circle with unclear intentions. He considered that although Rendon had been a fraud, he was still technically a mid-ranked swordsman, and defeating him while gaining recognition from someone like Julius naturally drew attention. Within Ragnar's rule of strength, people would either envy him or admire him, and from what Evelyn observed, this group clearly belonged to the latter. The young men stared at Theo with visible respect, amazed that the rumors about him were actually true, and many of them imagined themselves in Sybil's position during that spar, wondering if they could even block a single strike from him. That thought alone ignited their desire to challenge him even more, eager to test themselves against the rising talent. Among those gathered, one particular individual stood out, a young swordsman named Eod Nalan. Theo scanned the crowd carefully and felt satisfied seeing their reactions shift toward respect and admiration. His eyes locked onto Iod Nalan, and without hesitation, he called him out, catching the young man completely off guard in front of everyone. Theo calmly invited him forward for a spar, and Iod stepped in without fear, giving a firm salute before introducing himself as the third son of Viscount Nalan, specializing in double ascension swordsmanship. Theo returned the gesture casually, and wished him a good fight without dragging out unnecessary formality. Without wasting another second, both fighters took their stances and immediately engaged, their blades colliding sharply with each exchange. As the fight progressed, Theo could feel his basic swordsmanship improving in real time, each clash sharpening his instincts and control. Iod proved he wasn't just another weak opponent, as he moved with speed and precision, eventually slipping in a clever slash that seemed impossible to counter at first glance. At that exact moment, Theo felt everything around him slow down, as if time itself had stretched for just an instant. He adjusted his grip instinctively and angled his blade perfectly, intercepting the strike with flawless timing. The impact sent Iod's sword flying out of his hand, completely disarming him in a single decisive move. That critical defense didn't just win the exchange, it also boosted Theo's proficiency in the changing heart swordsmanship. Iod stood there weaponless, fully understanding the gap between them, and accepted his defeat without resistance. What caught Theo off guard, however, was the system response that followed. Gaining Iod's approval actually increased his luck stat. That realization immediately sparked a thought in his mind. Maybe his luck wasn't random at all, but tied directly to how others perceived him. If reputation influenced luck, then improving his standing through victories might be the key to fixing his terrible negative stat. The idea felt almost ridiculous, but at the same time, it made perfect sense within the system's logic. Without wasting time, he called the next challenger, Benat Ramiro, and the match ended almost instantly in Theo's favor, making it feel like an easy win. With another approval secured, his luck increased again by a single point, confirming his theory further. Then came Eric Moran, who at least managed to put up a fight, though it was clear from the start that he was outmatched. After that, Theo defeated Manfred Nonbert, and then moved on to Manuel Noir, without slowing down, completely overwhelming him in the process. Even Viro Perenc, who had a rough and intimidating appearance, barely lasted a minute before being taken down decisively. As the matches continued, Theo became completely absorbed in the rhythm of battle, stacking victory after victory, including another clean win against Daniel Riemann. By this point, he was fully immersed, almost enjoying the flow of combat itself as his confidence and control kept rising. When he finally looked around for another opponent, he realized no one else was stepping forward anymore, as if the crowd had collectively decided they didn't want to be the next one to get crushed. Despite pushing himself close to exhaustion from constant sparring, Theo checked his quest progress, expecting a significant jump, but the result left him slightly annoyed. The progress toward removing his imbecile title had only increased by 1%, which felt way too low considering how many opponents he had defeated. After thinking it through, he realized the reason was probably because most of these people already respected him now, so defeating them didn't change much in terms of reputation. If he wanted real progress, he would need to challenge stronger opponents, or prove himself in front of those who still doubted him. Either way, one thing was clear: continuing like this wouldn't be enough, and if he wanted to truly change his standing, he would need a different approach altogether. Suddenly, a man stepped forward, parting the crowd while commenting that Theo looked exhausted after non-stop fighting. Theo immediately brushed it off, saying he would rest later since he could still continue fighting without issues. Hearing that confidence, the armored man formally introduced himself and requested a sparring match without hesitation. He revealed himself as the Silver Lion, Remington Narcio, instantly shocking Theo and the surrounding young swordsmen. No one expected someone of his status to appear here so casually, especially among trainees and apprentices. Remington was one of the 4 Hounds of the North, the strongest of their generation before awakening. The group included Hulkus Lanky, Ray Ragnar, Remington Narcio himself, and Axion Ragnar from Camellia Palace. These 4 held absolute dominance among the Ragnar clan's younger generation, making their presence overwhelmingly significant. Remington explained he had arrived early to personally observe Theo's swordsmanship before the awakening ceremony began. With a relaxed smile, he saluted Theo and thanked him for agreeing to this sparring request. Known as a sword genius, Remington possessed sharp instincts, refined technique, and relentless work ethic. Even so, he seemed genuinely surprised to encounter someone like Theo emerging unexpectedly as a rival. Theo returned the salute proudly and introduced himself formally as Kyle Ragnar's 31st son, representing the northern lineage. Internally, he was stunned, never expecting to meet or fight someone he admired in his past life. When he expressed honor in crossing blades with Narcio's famed young deputy, he meant every word sincerely. Fueled by the thrill of continuous combat, Theo wanted to prove his growth against this elite opponent. Both fighters prepared eagerly, clearly anticipating a battle worth remembering between rising talents. Theo watched as Remington's aura surged outward, radiating overwhelming pressure that felt almost suffocating. For a brief moment, Theo questioned whether his current strength was enough to defeat someone like him. They charged simultaneously, blades clashing violently as sparks burst outward with every collision. Each strike carried immense force, shaking the arena while fragments of steel scattered across the battlefield. Theo remained focused, tracking every movement carefully, refusing to lose concentration even for a second. Remington fought with a confident smile, clearly enjoying the intensity of the exchange as much as Theo. After repeated clashes, one blade finally gave way under accumulated stress and continuous impact damage. Evelyn observed everything carefully from the sidelines, never once letting her attention drift away. The defeated young swordsman stood silently, watching with disbelief as the duel reached its turning point. The arena fell completely silent as the sound of a broken blade echoed sharply across space. It was Theo's sword that shattered, unable to withstand the sheer force behind Remington's strike. In that decisive moment, Remington cleanly sliced through the blade and halted inches before Theo's neck. To everyone watching, the outcome seemed obvious. Theo had lost the duel against overwhelming strength. Sybil struggled to accept it, refusing to believe his idol could fall so quickly during combat. Still, the result spoke clearly, and even he reluctantly acknowledged the unavoidable conclusion before him. Many believed Theo's growth impressive, but defeating a four-hound still seemed completely impossible right now. They held their titles for a reason, representing the absolute peak of their current generation's strength. Even so, Sybil insisted, Theo's fighting spirit alone was more than enough to admire deeply. Then unexpectedly, Remington declared the duel as his own loss, stunning everyone present instantly. He saluted Theo respectfully and thanked him sincerely, maintaining flawless form and undeniable composure throughout. Remington explained Theo's sword had already weakened before their fight even began earlier that day. He also acknowledged Theo's fatigue from constant battles, which significantly affected his performance during the duel. Theo responded calmly, stating battlefield conditions never allowed fairness, so he accepted defeat immediately. From his perspective, losing his weapon meant losing the fight, regardless of external circumstances involved. Remington simply smiled, understanding Theo's mindset, and extended his hand with genuine respect afterward. They shook hands firmly, forming mutual respect that neither initially expected from this unexpected encounter. Remington expressed hope they could fight again under proper conditions, where both could perform fully. Theo agreed without hesitation, clearly wanting another chance to test himself against this overwhelming opponent. The crowd watched in disbelief as one of the four hounds acknowledged Theo openly and respectfully. Many realized the young master was no longer ordinary, but someone genuinely rising above expectations rapidly. The duel boosted Theo's quest progress significantly, raising it directly to 35% completion instantly. From the sidelines, Evelyn released a quiet sigh of relief, knowing the outcome couldn't have been better. Theo finally understood the true gap between himself and the four hounds through this intense encounter. Although he had grown stronger through quests, talents, and secret manuals, this clash revealed his limits clearly. Facing Remington's power firsthand made him realize he still lacked strength in many crucial areas. Even though the duel ended prematurely due to his condition, he still gained valuable experience overall. His luck increased by 10 points, while his reputation rose significantly among those who witnessed everything. Still, the quest remained incomplete, meaning he needed additional methods to gain wider approval moving forward. He understood that creating impactful situations would be necessary to push his reputation even further. Remington then revealed he had another purpose beyond simply sparring with Theo that day. He presented a formal invitation, offering Theo entry into the prestigious Scaled Dragon Society. Hearing that name alone caused excitement to ripple across the young swordsmen gathered nearby instantly. The society was known for its strict selection process and high-status members among rising elites. Being invited personally by Remington made it even more significant, elevating the honor dramatically. Theo asked modestly if he truly qualified for such a prestigious group without exaggeration. Remington quickly reassured him, saying he was more than worthy of joining without hesitation. He downplayed the society, describing it as a gathering of peers awaiting the awakening ceremony together. However, Theo understood the deeper reality behind that group and its hidden political connections. The society revolved around his half-brother Axion and was filled with individuals who despised him. That made it dangerous, but also the perfect stage for advancing his current quest significantly. Joining would allow him to gather information on Axion and Camellia Palace while building reputation simultaneously. Seeing the opportunity clearly, Theo accepted the invitation and thanked Remington for offering it personally. He declared his intention to attend, fully aware he was stepping directly into hostile territory. Remington smiled, satisfied with his response, and shook Theo's hand once more with approval. He welcomed him warmly and offered support whenever Theo needed assistance or guidance moving forward. The meeting was scheduled in 2 weeks, giving Theo limited time to prepare carefully for what awaited. From the sidelines, Evelyn quietly took a drag from her cigarette, clearly concerned about Theo's path. Moments later, news of Theo receiving the high society invitation quickly reached the Rose Palace halls. Cecilia burst into his room with an excited smile, clearly unable to contain herself anymore. Theo had planned to deliver the news personally, but that was obviously unnecessary now. Cecilia had already summoned the palace's grooming team, filling the room with bustling preparation energy. Since it was Theo's first invitation to something truly significant, his mother was naturally thrilled beyond words. The gathering included Axion, Amel's cunning son, along with brilliant talents like Remington himself. These young elites even attracted attention from the council, making every detail extremely important. Cecilia understood understood that Theo's appearance, posture, and demeanor would all be judged closely during this event. Without wasting time, she pulled out a measuring tape and began taking Theo's measurements carefully. Cecilia trusted Theo's etiquette completely, knowing he wouldn't embarrass himself in that regard. However, attire and presentation were entirely different matters that required proper preparation and refinement. Fortunately, this was an area where Cecilia could personally guide him with confidence and experience. After all, she had once been a successful actress, well-versed in elegance and high society standards. She felt genuinely happy being involved, finally able to support her son in something meaningful. Theo understood that his mother had always carried the burden of raising an illegitimate child alone. Cecilia blamed herself for the shameful label placed upon him, even though none of it was truly her fault. In the ruthless Ragnar clan, where strength defined worth, her situation had never been easy. Theo could only imagine how painful it must have been raising a weak child in his past life. Though Cecilia appeared cheerful and excited, deep down she was simply worried about her son's future. She pulled him into a tight embrace, assuring him she would always believe in his potential. Her warmth slowly melted the cold bitterness that had settled deep within Theo's heart. He hugged her back sincerely, holding on to her with genuine affection and quiet determination. This time, he promised himself he would work harder and stop making his mother worry anymore. While Cecilia celebrated his invitation to the Scaled Dragon Society, Theo had very different thoughts entirely. Instead of excitement, he was already imagining crushing that entire nest of arrogant snakes personally. 2 weeks passed quickly, and soon, the night of the society banquet finally arrived. Remington personally arrived at the Rose Palace, waiting outside with an elegant, luxurious carriage. The moment he saw Theo, he paused briefly, almost thinking he was looking at someone else entirely. Theo had completely abandoned his usual training attire, and now wore refined, high-quality clothing. Thanks to Cecilia and the palace staff, his appearance had transformed into that of a noble aristocrat. Remington commented on his impressive change, and Theo initially assumed he was just joking around. However, Remington clarified he was completely serious, genuinely impressed by Theo's transformation. Theo himself admitted that his body had undergone noticeable changes within those 2 short weeks. He had grown taller, his physique becoming more balanced and muscular through relentless training sessions. Surprisingly, Remington had visited him daily during those weeks, training together and growing closer through constant sparring. During that time, Theo also gained a loyal following, with Sybil and others frequently gathering around him. Evelyn ended up managing an entire group of enthusiastic trainees, despite only agreeing to teach Theo briefly. Those 2 weeks were chaotic yet productive, filled with non-stop training and overwhelming attention. Even now, Theo still felt slightly drained from dealing with so many eager followers daily. As he prepared for his first formal banquet, Remington reassured him there was no need to feel nervous. However, he issued a single warning, explaining that his friend Axion could be quite mischievous. It turned out Axion himself had requested Theo's invitation, curious about the so-called rising star. In fact, the entire banquet had been arranged specifically with Theo in mind. Hearing that completely changed the situation, though not necessarily in a negative way for him. If anything, this setup actually worked better for Theo's intentions and future plans. Instead of concern, he found himself looking forward to being mocked and insulted from every direction. Meanwhile, inside the banquet hall, Axion Ragnar was already seated, casually sipping expensive alcohol. The Dark Tiger wore a faint smile, clearly anticipating the arrival of his new entertainment. To him, Theo was nothing more than a toy waiting to be broken for amusement. Soon, the carriage rolled to a halt before a lavish palace, marking their arrival clearly. Remington stepped out first, followed by Theo, who immediately scanned the surroundings with sharp eyes. He realized he was about to enter Camellia Palace, the territory of those scumbags. These were the same people who manipulated Randon and sabotaged his growth deliberately. In his past life, they had destroyed him, his mother, and the entire Rose Palace mercilessly. That bitter memory stirred quietly, fueling his thoughts of revenge as he stood there silently. His focus broke when Remington casually invited him inside, with his usual energetic attitude. Remington mentioned that Axion would personally greet them, and should already be waiting outside. Theo understood perfectly why that bastard Axion had arranged this invitation in the first place. That idiot probably believed it was his responsibility to suppress Theo's sudden rise in power. However, Theo hadn't walked into this snake pit blindly, without preparing something of his own. He fully intended to show Axion exactly who he was dealing with today. As they approached the palace entrance, Theo suddenly halted after noticing something strange nearby. From an upper floor, a faint blue light flickered, clearly indicating the presence of a system quest. That brief distraction pulled his attention away, making him unaware of something descending rapidly toward him. Remington reacted instantly, attempting to intercept the incoming object before it reached Theo directly. Unfortunately, it exploded into a cloud of white smoke before he could reach it in time. Remington immediately panicked, calling out Theo's name to check if he was unharmed. Thankfully, Theo remained completely fine, only covered lightly in white powder from the explosion. It turned out to be nothing more than a sack of flour thrown from above as a prank. Remington's expression darkened instantly, clearly furious at such childish and disrespectful behavior. Theo calmly noted that he wouldn't have dodged that attack in his previous life at all. Worse, His carefully prepared outfit would have been completely ruined if this had happened earlier. For a moment, he suspected Remington might have been involved, but quickly dismissed that thought. Remington's reaction was genuine, filled with confusion and irritation toward whoever pulled that stunt. Clearly, this immature prank came from those smug nobles watching from the upper floors. It didn't take long before a familiar voice cut through the tension confidently. That voice dismissed the incident as nothing more than a friendly greeting between acquaintances. Remington wasn't buying that excuse at all, and remained visibly annoyed by the situation. Soon enough, Axion himself appeared, wearing his usual smug expression without any shame. He casually claimed that the prank was simply a playful welcome for his dear brother Theo. Theo immediately activated his observation skill, carefully analyzing Axion's hidden traits and intentions. The results showed madness, psychopathy, and overwhelming swordsmanship potential within him. At the same time, Axion clearly viewed Theo as nothing more than an entertaining new toy. Instead of reacting negatively, Theo smiled and thanked him sincerely, which completely threw Axion off guard. He continued by praising Axion's welcoming attitude and expressing excitement for the event. That unexpected response only made Axion grin wider, clearly enjoying this new version of his brother. To him, Theo had suddenly become far more interesting compared to his previous pathetic self. With that, both Theo and Remington finally entered the grand banquet hall together. Inside, the room was filled with elite young nobles gathered for this exclusive private gathering. Only selected individuals were invited to dine, socialize, and observe potential rivals closely. Everyone present was focused on today's special guest, Theo Ragnar himself. Most couldn't understand why Axion invited someone widely known as the clan's useless imbecile. Even though Theo belonged to the Ragnar bloodline, his reputation still disgusted many present. For them, his presence alone felt like an insult to the Scaled Dragon Society. However, they couldn't deny one thing. Theo's appearance was undeniably sharp and refined tonight. His overall presence stood out, even among nobles accustomed to luxury and elegance. Many assumed Axion had simply brought him here as entertainment for humiliation. Since these arrogant nobles didn't bother lowering their voices, their insults were clearly audible everywhere. Remington apologized quietly, mentioning that such gatherings were not usually this disgraceful. Theo, however, didn't mind their words in the slightest. In fact, he welcomed their mockery, knowing it would make crushing them later far more satisfying. Meanwhile, his attention shifted again toward the faint blue glow of that hidden quest nearby. He was certain it held importance, but he still needed the right opportunity to approach it naturally. Axion, the host of the party, calmly descended the stairs and approached Theo directly. He asked his brother casually whether he was enjoying the banquet so far. Theo forced himself to stay calm, strictly following the plan he had already mapped out. He smiled lightly and thanked Axion again for inviting him to such an event. Axion then sarcastically apologized for the flower prank from earlier, acting overly playful about it. In the next instant, he closed the distance and grabbed Theo's shoulders tightly. He pressured Theo to accept the apology publicly, putting him on display before everyone present. Remington instinctively moved to step in, sensing the tension rising between the two brothers. However, Theo quickly stopped him, saying there was nothing to apologize for at all. He repeated Axion's own words, claiming it was just a greeting between brothers. That response completely caught Axion off guard, leaving the psycho momentarily speechless. Axion soon laughed it off and patted Theo's back like a proud older brother. He admitted he never expected Theo to have this much backbone and attitude now. Compared to their childhood, Theo had clearly changed into someone far more interesting. Axion found himself liking this new version of his brother more and more. Meanwhile, the surrounding nobles whispered among themselves, observing Theo's reaction carefully. They mocked him openly, calling him nothing more than Axion's personal toy. Some even brought up his illegitimate lineage without any hesitation or shame. They compared him to the noble blood of the Troivan clan, emphasizing the difference brutally. While both Theo and Axion were Ragnars, they claimed the gap between them was massive. After all, the Troivan clan was known as a powerhouse of swordsmanship in the East. In contrast, Theo's mother was just a commoner woman with no noble standing whatsoever. Theo continued smiling as he absorbed every insult thrown in his direction silently. However, the nobles soon shifted their attention toward Remington, questioning his association with Theo. They began insulting Remington as well, calling him an illegitimate son of the Narcio family. That crossed a dangerous line, pushing Remington closer to losing control. He had been tense since arriving, and hearing that forbidden topic almost made him snap instantly. Theo noticed this shift and realized Remington might act if things continued like this. If that happened, Theo would lose control of the stage he was carefully building. He had planned to endure more insults for a while longer, but that strategy no longer worked. Before Axion could lead him elsewhere, Theo suddenly paused. He stated that since he had just arrived, he should greet everyone properly first. With that, he walked straight toward the banquet table where the mocking nobles were gathered. Every single pair of eyes followed him, curious about what the imbecile would do next. Theo calmly picked up a bottle of wine from the table without saying anything. He approached the noble who had been insulting Remington's lineage moments earlier. The man smirked arrogantly, asking if he had said something wrong just now. Theo adjusted his grip slightly, and without hesitation, smashed the bottle directly onto his head. The glass shattered violently, leaving blood dripping down the noble's blonde hair instantly. The entire hall froze, shocked by the sudden and brutal turn of events. Even Remington and Axion were caught completely off guard by Theo's actions. The injured noble clutched his head, screaming in pain while blood soaked his hair. Theo stood above him, still holding the broken bottle without any trace of hesitation. The man tried to curse Theo, continuing his arrogant rant despite the situation. Before he could finish, Theo delivered a brutal kick that shattered the noble's jaw completely. The impact silenced him instantly, leaving only muffled sounds as he collapsed helplessly. Theo's eyes turned cold, his expression losing any trace of earlier calmness. He claimed this was simply his version of a friendly greeting, just like earlier. According to him, he only responded because the greeting he received was unpleasant. The surrounding nobles stood frozen, unable to process what they were witnessing. At that moment, Theo's quest progress silently increased, reaching 43% instantly. Remington watched closely, realizing this behavior didn't match Theo's usual personality at all. He began to suspect Theo was doing this deliberately for a deeper reason. As the injured noble lay bleeding on the palace floor, Theo stepped forward calmly again. He declared that since greetings were exchanged, it was now time for farewells as well. He grabbed the man's arm and forced him onto a nearby platform. The noble begged desperately for Theo to stop, but his pleas were completely ignored. Theo raised his foot and stomped down brutally, shattering the man's arm with a sickening crack. The horrifying sound echoed across the silent banquet hall. Every noble who had been mocking him earlier now stood speechless, fear replacing their arrogance instantly. Theo's quest progress surged again, reaching 58% after that display. The injured noble passed out, unable to endure the pain any longer. Drool and blood stained the expensive palace floor as Theo casually discarded the body aside. He looked around at the remaining nobles. He asked calmly if anyone else wanted to greet him the same way. That single statement pushed his quest progress even further, climbing up to 66%. Suddenly, knights who had been hiding within the shadows stepped forward and surrounded Theo from every direction. 4 sharp swords closed in around him, trapping him completely with no visible escape route. Their killing intent was clear, focused entirely on neutralizing the threat standing before them. They declared that harming their young master was an unforgivable crime that demanded death as punishment. Theo simply smiled. He casually asked them who exactly the man he had just trashed actually was. The knights answered confidently, stating that the injured noble was the 3rd young master of the Hanavi clan, Ian Hanavi. Theo found their tone amusing, almost laughable considering the situation they were standing in. The Hanavi clan was one of the 6 snow clans that served under Ragnar's authority directly. He had already anticipated that the bodyguard knights of such nobles wouldn't stay silent forever. They would never sit quietly while their master was humiliated in front of everyone, especially not when the one doing it was someone they always mocked as the useless imbecile of Ragnar. Theo asked them calmly what the real problem was if he had beaten up their young master. His voice carried arrogance now, laced with something far heavier than simple confidence. He questioned whether the dogs of a Bannerman clan truly had the right to demand his death. He reminded them clearly that he carried the bloodline of Kyle Ragnar himself. He asked them if they could truly bear the consequences of threatening such a lineage. That statement alone hit them harder than any physical attack ever could. Their grips on their swords loosened unconsciously, as fear crept into their minds instantly. The anger they felt for their injured master began to fade under the overwhelming weight of reality. Theo wasn't just some weakling they could bully anymore. The aura he was releasing now felt oppressive, suffocating even seasoned knights standing before him. This was not the imbecile they had grown used to mocking without consequence. Now, they were staring at someone entirely different, someone far more dangerous than expected. They suddenly realized that Theo still held the right of succession as a direct Ragnar bloodline member. Ragnar ruled as the Lord of the North, the absolute authority over the 6 snow clans. Declaring death upon such blood was not just reckless, it was suicidal. Such an action could justify the destruction of an entire snow clan without question or hesitation. That level of protection had been ignored for so long because Theo was considered useless. But now, that illusion had completely shattered in front of everyone present. All 4 knights realized they had made a massive, unforgivable mistake in this moment. They needed to apologize immediately before things escalated beyond control. But Theo had already moved ahead, issuing a command to kill them to someone hidden nearby. A flash of steel cut through the air so fast that no one could even react properly. In the very next instant, 4 heads separated cleanly from their bodies, mid-stance. Blood sprayed violently across the palace floor as their bodies collapsed lifelessly. Theo stood at the center, completely calm, as if none of this chaos even touched him. The mysterious figure responsible for the execution landed gracefully on the blood-soaked carpet. It was none other than Evelyn, revealing her presence before everyone. With more blood spreading across the luxurious hall, the arrogant nobles finally felt real fear. This was no longer a joke, nor some petty humiliation between nobles. Theo's quest progress surged upward, reaching 70% completion at that moment. Axion had no choice but to watch silently, as his banquet turned into Theo's display of power. The entire event he planned was slipping out of his control rapidly. Evelyn then looked at Theo and asked when he realized she had been following him. Theo implied it was obvious, though he didn't question her reasons for being there. Whether he understood her motives or not didn't matter right now. Thanks to her presence, he could flip the entire situation without worrying about consequences. The crowd remained silent, completely stunned, waiting for Theo's next move nervously. The night before the banquet, Commander Julius had secretly visited Evelyn in her quarters. He mocked her for refusing new disciples while training Theo so seriously every day. Evelyn seemed used to his behavior and didn't bother entertaining his nonsense anymore. Julius had recently found amusement in bothering his former comrade whenever possible. That included casually stealing her expensive wine without asking for permission. That night, he demanded to know what made Theo so special in her eyes. Evelyn answered directly, stating that Theo was far beyond expectations in every aspect. She praised his attitude toward training, his discipline, and his talent without hesitation. According to her, he was among the best students she had ever trained. Considering that even Axion had once trained under her, that statement carried serious weight. She went even further, claiming that Theo's potential surpassed Axion's completely. She insisted she wasn't exaggerating or speaking carelessly at all. Julius trusted her judgment when it came to recognizing true talent without question. He believed that such a drastic change couldn't happen overnight without reason. The most logical explanation was that Theo had been hiding his strength all along. It sounded strange, but it fit the situation better than any other explanation available. Evelyn admitted that Theo felt different compared to other students she had trained. It seemed like he was constantly being chased by something unseen. He pushed himself relentlessly, almost like he was running out of time to catch up. That was exactly why she felt uneasy about him attending the Scaled Dragon Society gathering. Julius agreed, sensing that something significant would happen at the banquet. As a Ragnar, he understood how such gatherings naturally turned into battles for dominance. When young predators gathered, they would inevitably clash to establish hierarchy among themselves. Before leaving, he placed a uniform down for Evelyn. He urged her to convince Theo to join his unit once again without giving up. At the same time, he made it clear that he wanted Evelyn herself back in the cavalry. He refused to accept her retirement just because she couldn't ride dragons anymore. After finishing her expensive wine, Julius left her quarters casually, thanking her for it. Evelyn lost a valuable bottle that night, but gained something far more meaningful in return. Back in the present, Evelyn quietly pieced everything together step by step. She realized Theo must have noticed her trailing him and deliberately orchestrated this entire situation. It even seemed possible he joined the Scaled Dragon Society specifically to trigger this exact outcome. Her earlier concerns now felt unnecessary as she reconsidered every moment leading to this chaos. She wondered exactly when Theo had sensed her presence during their journey to the palace. In truth, Theo detected her the moment he stepped into the carriage earlier. With his dragon heart, he could expand his perception, sensing energy like a sixth sense. That awareness allowed him to monitor everything around him without drawing attention to himself. Theo turned toward Evelyn and calmly laid out the situation in front of everyone present. He explained that many nobles here had openly disrespected a successor candidate of Ragnar. Then he asked her what punishment such a serious offense deserved under clan laws. Hearing that, several nobles nearly collapsed, already aware of the consequences awaiting them. Evelyn, always strict with rules, answered without hesitation or emotion in her voice. She stated that depending on the severity, immediate execution was entirely justified under clan law. Theo smiled faintly, satisfied that she had completed the setup exactly as he intended. However, he then acted merciful, declaring the offenders were still immature and unawakened. Instead of execution, he decided removing one arm from each would settle the matter. Evelyn moved instantly, her blade turning into an unstoppable force among the panicking nobles. She struck without hesitation, cutting through them like a machine designed purely for punishment. The second son of the Byron clan lost his right arm instantly. The first son of the Red and White Mercenary Corps screamed as blood burst from his severed limb. The fourth daughter of the Ceres Merchant Guild wasn't spared, her arm falling just as easily. The third son of the Clark clan attempted to flee, but Evelyn easily caught him. At that moment, Theo's quest progress climbed further, reaching 79% completion. One desperate noble crawled toward Axion, begging for help with whatever strength he had left. Axion simply repeated Theo's earlier words, claiming it was just another form of greeting. Before the man could process that response, a blade flashed beside him suddenly. His arm was severed cleanly, blood spraying close enough to almost stain Axion's clothes. Axion glanced toward Evelyn, locking eyes with his former teacher in silence. She met his gaze calmly and nodded, completely unfazed by the situation unfolding. He never expected to encounter her here, especially in the middle of such a brutal scene. Evelyn raised her blade in a formal salute, acknowledging him briefly without hesitation. Axion observed carefully, realizing she only targeted those who insulted the bloodline directly. Theo had structured everything so precisely that even Axion couldn't intervene without consequences. As a fellow successor candidate, Axion lacked the authority to stop this punishment entirely. Within minutes, Evelyn severed the right arms of 14 nobles under Theo's command. While their lives were spared, their futures as swordsmen were now permanently altered. They could seek priests to to reattach limbs, but their skill and careers would never recover fully. Everything had gone exactly as Theo planned from the very beginning. Axion, however, became more curious about how Theo secured both Remington and Evelyn's support. The boy, once known as the imbecile of the Rose Palace, had become something terrifying. Instead of fear, Axion felt excitement, eager to crush this version of Theo personally. With his objective complete, Theo calmly called Evelyn and Remington to leave the palace. They walked out slowly, the remaining nobles watching them with fear-filled eyes. As they reached the exit, Theo and Axion locked eyes silently without speaking. Just before leaving, Theo grabbed Axion's arm tightly, wrinkling his clothes with force. After a brief moment, he released him and waved casually, saying he enjoyed the banquet. That simple gesture marked the end of everything he came here to accomplish. At that moment, his final tutorial quest to escape the imbecile title was completed fully. Axion burned with anger, but restrained himself, knowing acting now would be foolish. Instead, he stormed out, screaming Theo's name in pure frustration and rage. With all tutorial quests finished, no one would dare call Theo an imbecile anymore. However, for Theo, this was only the beginning of something much bigger and darker. His reward appeared as an experience elixir, capable of raising levels instantly under certain limits. News of the massacre spread quickly across Camellia Palace, shocking everyone who heard it. The prestigious Scaled Dragon Society had been torn apart, both physically and reputationally. Meanwhile, Theo's subordinates took him to a pub in celebration of his flashy and gory high society debut. Every one of his followers was there. Even Evelyn stopped by to get some drinks. He wondered how the Scaled Dragon Society was feeling after being done in by a man they loved to call an imbecile. While inside the Camellia Palace, Emil Ragnar is in disbelief after learning that not only did they give the MC justification for his actions, but he also chopped off everyone's arms in front of Axion. Axion answers positively, which makes her feel frustrated since it makes no sense to her, and she remembers warning Axion beforehand not to take things so lightly. She is disappointed to hear that they didn't just try pressuring him into submission, but have given our boy complete authority to go wild. Axion tries to defend himself and tells her that once Theo gets recognition, it will be hard to conquer the Rose Palace, assuring her not to worry. However, she tells him to reflect on his actions and doesn't agree to listen to him any further. She points out his mistakes, which almost caused their great plan to get ruined. Axion decides to listen to her and leaves. Ime wonders who Axion takes after to be so obnoxious. Ed Troyven replies that Axion resembles her when she was young. She's not in the mood to joke around, so he apologizes and assures her that the incident might not be worth worrying about so much. He explains that the Rose Palace has been a part of the clan head's harem, so it's very difficult to get its ownership. Even though it has been outside of the clan leader interest since it's a place where Rifra gathers, it still has the support of the clan leader himself. He shares his plan that all they needed was justification. And thankfully, since Theo has created chaos at the scale of the Dragon Society meeting, he is slowly becoming the representative of the Rose Palace. By using the incident as justification, they can suppress the MC through legal procedures. Emil is left speechless after hearing this and contemplates that the reason she was afraid of Theo becoming stronger was that she feared his power and influence would expand over time if the clan leader focused more on the Rose Palace. However, by using Theo, who is slowly becoming stronger, she realizes the Camellia Palace can suppress him through legal procedures, and the Rose Palace will have no other choice but to bow down in front of the Troyvens. She believes the plan might actually work, and asks Ed how long it's going to take to prepare. The guy assures her that all preparations are already finished, and tomorrow morning when she wakes up, she will hear some great news. He comforts her, and tells Amal that she can enjoy a bath and sleep well for the night, while sharing that he has prepared an aromatic candle for her from the South Akron volcanic region. Emil decides to depend on her elder brother, and shows her gratitude. Meanwhile, inside a tavern, Remington sat there still processing everything that had just happened. He admitted honestly that he was shocked and didn't expect Theo to go that far for him. Theo didn't even understand what he was talking about and found it ridiculous. Watching Remington act emotional after drinking nothing but orange juice felt absurdly funny to him. Remington insisted that despite being insulted himself, Theo never hesitated even for a second. The moment Remington was targeted, Theo stepped forward without any doubt or fear. Hearing that made Remington feel embarrassed. Realizing he hadn't done anything in return, he regretted standing still while insults were thrown and not acting like he should have. Looking at Theo now, he felt even more surprised by everything he had endured. Theo had lived through years of being mocked as a useless, talentless child by everyone around him. Despite that, he never gave up and somehow climbed his way to this level of strength. Even when facing opponents far beyond his reach, he still fought with absolute determination. Remington pointed out how Theo stood against Camellia Palace without hesitation, something nobody dared to do. That level of willpower wasn't something you could fake or borrow from others. He acknowledged that Theo had the courage to swing his sword without fear, and to him, it all looked like Theo did it purely for his sake. That misunderstanding hit harder when Remington started getting emotional, almost tearing up in front of him. Theo instantly realized things had gone completely off track in Remington's head. Before Theo could fix that mess, Remington stood up with a firm expression on his face. He declared that despite his clan's expectations, he wanted to follow a different path from now on. He openly stated that he wished to stand beside Theo moving forward. The people inside the tavern immediately reacted, cheering loudly at the dramatic declaration unfolding. They praised both Theo and Remington, calling them incredible without knowing the full story. Theo tried to correct the misunderstanding, but someone stopped him silently. Evelyn's voice reached him through telepathy, telling him to just let things play out naturally. She pointed out that this misunderstanding wasn't harmful and might actually benefit him. According to her, most people here genuinely wanted to align themselves with Theo now. Hearing that, Theo smiled faintly, but his thoughts shifted inward immediately after that. He knew deep down that none of this strength was truly his own. Everything he had achieved so far came from the mysterious status window guiding him forward. At first, he believed that system was tied to his regrets or some lingering fragment. But now, seeing how detailed and structured it was, he understood it was something entirely different. There was even a faint sense of déjà vu, though he ignored it deliberately. After all, whatever it was helping him grow stronger at an insane rate. Following the Scaled Dragon Society incident, he noticed that his level had increased again. With every level up, the system granted him points to freely distribute across his stats. That realization made him understand just how much control he had over his own growth. He could shape his abilities however he wanted without restriction or limitation. And honestly, that kind of potential felt terrifying even to him. Evelyn noticed the slight, dangerous smile forming on his face and grew concerned instantly. Theo, however, shifted his focus toward what mattered next, preparing for retaliation from Camellia Palace. He turned toward Remington and asked if he was willing to help him. Remington didn't hesitate at all, and assured him he could ask for anything without concern. Theo casually called him Remy, which caught him slightly off guard but didn't bother him. Then Theo pulled something out and handed it over carefully. He explained that the war for the throne between him and Axion would begin soon enough. Because of that, he needed proper preparation before things escalated beyond control. Remy went silent for a moment, understanding the weight of those words. Theo remembered clearly that in his previous life, Remington became the head of the Narcio clan. Under him, that clan grew strong enough to stand against even the Ragnars themselves. That made this moment extremely valuable for Theo's future plans. He handed Remington a piece of paper, trusting him without holding anything back. Remy accepted it seriously and promised that since he had pledged himself, he would give everything. Theo nodded, showing genuine gratitude for that level of commitment. But before anything else could be said, the tavern doors burst open violently without warning. Several knights stormed inside, shouting Theo's name loudly as everyone turned toward them. The atmosphere instantly shifted from calm to tense within seconds. They declared that under the authority of the Sword of Law, Theo was under arrest immediately. The charges included assault, threats, and intimidation during the banquet incident earlier. Evelyn immediately called it complete nonsense, clearly furious at the claim. Theo, however, told her calmly to stand down and not escalate things further right now. He stepped forward and asked to see the arrest warrant personally before reacting. The moment he read it, he realized it was completely legitimate. The ink on the document hadn't even dried yet, proving how rushed this decision was. His enemies had clearly acted fast, trying to corner him before he could respond. After a brief moment of thought, Theo decided not to resist arrest at all. He allowed them to place restraints on him without putting up any kind of fight. As he was escorted out of the tavern, he looked back at his companions with a small smile. That expression showed he trusted them to handle everything in his absence. Remington and Evelyn stood there stunned, unable to react immediately to what just happened. Remy then shifted his attention toward the paper Theo had given him earlier. Whatever was written there suddenly became far more important than before. The news of Theo's arrest reaches the Rose Palace, and his mother, Cecilia, is left completely stunned upon hearing that her son is being taken to the tribunal, collapsing to her knees in shock. Her servant immediately grows worried, but she reassures him that she is fine, and asks why her son was taken away. He explains that it is because of the Scaled Dragon Society, and that Theo is being accused of inciting a rebellion. Cecilia is taken aback, and wonders if her son will be put on trial. The servant believes that Theo will not escape such a situation easily, especially since he completely destroyed the Scaled Dragon Society. Cecilia never imagined that her son's invitation would lead to such chaos, yet she still believes that he will overcome this, because that is the kind of person he is, and she silently wishes for his safe return. Meanwhile, inside a carriage, as the MC is being escorted to the tribunal, they finally reach their destination, and he realizes it has been quite some time since he last saw this place. Having entirely wiped out the Scaled Dragon Society, he already understands that he will not receive a light punishment and will most likely face a formal trial for his actions. He is also aware that, as Ragnar's successor, his qualifications will be questioned. The knights order him to step out, and as he walks forward, he senses that his enemies intend to completely crush him, yet a faint smile appears on his face as everything is unfolding exactly according to his plan. The knights announce that the prisoner Theo has been brought in, and after receiving permission, they escort him inside. The MC thinks that if he is going to reveal everything he has prepared, there could be no better stage than one of this magnitude. Standing before a gathering of extraordinary figures, he feels a slight sense of tension as he takes in everyone present in the room. He notices Julius Ragnar, the demon dragon captain of the white-armored dragon cavalry, along with Ed Troyven, the Sky Dragon, and one of the 9 dragons who protect Ragnar. He admits to himself that in his previous life, he would have been completely overwhelmed in such a situation. He also sees Osa Ragnar, the sword dragon of the Plum Blossom Palace, and Wolfgang Ragnar, the elder dragon and head counselor, both present in the assembly. As Wolfgang looks at him, the MC realizes it has been a long time since they last met, and he had not expected to encounter him here. He knows that Wolfgang places great importance on bloodlines, and that someone like him, a half-blooded and illegitimate child, must appear utterly repulsive in his eyes, something Wolfgang does not even attempt to conceal. Wolfgang questions whether he understands that he has been summoned to answer for his crimes, and goes on to state that the Byron clan, the Sarah's Merchant Guild, the Red and White Mercenary Corps, and even the Hanavi clan are all severing ties with the main family because of his reckless actions. Growing increasingly angry, Wolfgang insults him and demands to know whether he can bear the consequences of the damage he has caused, making it clear that he will be held responsible for tarnishing Ragnar's honor. Theo acknowledges his words, and admits that he had been far too careless, stating that instead of merely severing limbs, he should have gone as far as cutting off their heads. His response leaves everyone shocked, yet he continues, asserting that all those clans are merely their subjects. He explains that the Lord grants them land and honor, and in return, it is the duty of the subjects to offer loyalty and even their lives to Ragnar, as this is the foundation of chivalry. And despite knowing this, they chose to defy their lord. Showing clear frustration, he adds that had he known of their insolence earlier, he would have executed them without hesitation, insisting that they should be punished to restore the principles of chivalry. He makes it clear that he could not stand by and watch the honor Ragnar had upheld for centuries be trampled. The room falls silent, while Julius, in his thoughts, finds Theo impressive and assumes that he will receive a standard punishment after presenting such justification. Wolfgang, however, believes that Theo is mocking them with clever words, but Osa Ragnar understands his reasoning and agrees that he is correct. Wolfgang is surprised by her stance, and Osa explains that while Ragnar is powerful, it is not truly great, and therefore must still heed the voices of its vassals and knights, or risk eventual downfall, as ruling the world cannot be achieved through strength alone. Theo understands her perspective and decides to remember it. The MC observes that the first wife of the clan head, who is also the greatest swordsman in the north, is fortunately on his side and not hostile toward him. Osa, however, expresses that she hopes he understands that the punishment he is about to receive is justified. Theo asks about the punishment, and Wolfgang informs him that he will be placed under probation for 3 months. In response, Theo expresses his desire to participate in the ceremony, which immediately irritates Wolfgang, who interprets it as defiance. However, Osa chooses to consider Theo's request and ultimately permits him to take part in the awakening ceremony scheduled for the following year. Ed points out that it had already been decided that the children Theo injured would also be participating next year. Even so, due to the demon dragon's interference, Theo ends up receiving a lighter punishment. Ed feels satisfied seeing his plans unfold as intended, fully aware that delaying the awakening ceremony brings dishonor upon the Ragnar. Since the MC represents the Rose Palace, bearing such disgrace would weaken its standing and allow the Camellia Palace to move ahead of it. A subtle smile forms on his face as he becomes convinced that once everything is set in motion, Theo will have no way to counter it and will be forced to accept defeat. Ed also knows that if Theo attempts to appeal, it would lead to his death, and he assumes that Theo is not foolish enough to take such a step. Contrary to his expectations, the MC openly declares his intention to appeal, leaving not only Ed but everyone else in shock. Ed struggles to suppress his satisfaction, internally mocking Theo as a complete fool whose arrogance knows no bounds. And he feels even more pleased, as the situation appears to be turning in his favor. Julius questions whether Theo truly understands the consequences of filing an appeal, and Theo confirms that he does, fully aware that it is not something that can be settled with a mere 3 months of probation. Recognizing that the demon dragon must have manipulated the situation behind the scenes, Theo still chooses to proceed according to his plan, stating that within the proud and powerful Ragnar, an appeal is equivalent to declaring war. He makes it clear that he has no intention of accepting even the slightest punishment, insisting that in the end, only strength determines the truth, and he even goes as far as claiming that his actions deserve recognition rather than punishment. His words leave the entire room in stunned silence. Meanwhile, At the hidden northern branch of the Ceres Merchant Guild, the surroundings are consumed by flames as chaos unfolds. Evelyn finishes off the last remaining opponent, and at that moment, Remington approaches her from behind, holding a small box in his hands. He reveals that this was the location where the item had been hidden, exactly as Theo had predicted. Glancing down at the box, he remarks that Troiven's Camellia Palace is now finished. Meanwhile, as the MC stands before all the influential figures, Wolfgang questions whether he truly intends to turn an issue that could be resolved with just 3 months of probation into an all-out war. He calls it pure arrogance and challenges whether the boy genuinely believes he can stand against the combined strength of 15 clans on his own. Theo responds by stating that this is something he must handle personally, especially considering the overwhelming gap in power between both sides. In his view, resolving appeals through proxy battles is a perfectly normal practice. Julius reflects on the nature of such appeals, understanding that they are meant to determine victory and defeat through combat. However, when the difference in power makes a full-scale war impossible to win, each side is allowed to send a single representative, with the outcome decided through a one-on-one sword fight. This system of proxy battle means that Theo would effectively be representing himself. Julius realizes that if things proceed this way, there is a very high chance that Theo will lose, especially since the opposing side's representative is likely to be Axion. He begins to wonder whether Theo has some hidden plan, also recognizing that if Theo is relying on Evelyn or even himself to step in as his representative, he will likely be disappointed. Theo formally requests that the proxy battle be held within a week, in accordance with the rules. Ed observes this and believes he has already figured out Theo's intentions, assuming that he plans to rely on Julius or Evelyn as his proxy. However, Ed is confident that no one will agree to stand for him, forcing Theo to fight personally. With that in mind, Ed decides to send Axion as his own representative, intending to crush Theo and remind him of his place. Just as Ed prepares to announce his choice, a sudden presence interrupts the moment, leaving everyone in complete silence. A man enters, praising Theo's clever schemes while remarking on how much he has changed since their last meeting. It is none other than the clan head, Kyle Ragnar. The moment he steps into the trial chamber, everyone immediately bows in respect, and the MC also kneels, greeting the incarnation of the great dragon god. At that instant, a system window appears before him, assigning a new quest to seize control of the Camellia Palace and uncover its hidden secrets. He realizes that this is his first quest since the tutorial, and wonders if it is connected to the mysterious blue light he had seen earlier. He acknowledges that he had completely forgotten about it amidst everything that had been happening, briefly recalling that something significant was tied to it. He quickly stops dwelling on it and shifts his focus back to the present, now facing his father. The situation has become even more unpredictable with the king's sudden appearance, introducing a massive variable that could easily disrupt his plans. Kyle instructs him to stand and mentions that he has already heard about the entire situation, recognizing that his son intends to proceed with an appeal through a proxy battle. Theo confirms this, and his father acknowledges that it would be difficult for him to fight personally, asking who he intends to choose as his representative. The MC realizes that this is a test, and responds that there is no one suitable to take his place, meaning he intends to step forward as his own representative in the appeal. His father concludes that this choice will lead to his defeat, but Theo refuses to accept such a judgment without even being given the chance to prove himself. He steels his resolve, determined to face whatever comes without yielding to anyone. Hearing this, the king suddenly bursts into laughter and draws the attention of everyone present, asking if they heard what his son had just declared. He expresses admiration for Theo's refusal to bow down, recognizing it as a true reflection of the Ragnar spirit, and openly praises his son for his attitude. Theo feels a sense of satisfaction and begins to smile, knowing that everything is unfolding according to his plan. He understands that the proxy battle is merely a distraction, and since he does not actually intend to fight, he can speak boldly without hesitation. He recalls the tasks he assigned to Remy and Evelyn, confident that they will soon obtain proof of the Camellia Palace's treasonous conspiracy, which would secure his victory without the need for battle. Finally, the king decides to offer his son a chance. As the ruler of Ragnar, Kyle declares that he will personally test Theo by delivering a single strike. Theo is taken aback as his father tells him to disregard the trial entirely, stating that if he can withstand just one blow, all charges against him will be cleared without any punishment. The king then turns and instructs Theo to step forward, but Ed immediately begins shouting in protest, trying to object to the situation. He understands that testing Theo with a single strike essentially means the king is acknowledging him, and if Theo somehow manages to endure it, he would gain the direct approval of the clan head himself. Although Ed is confident that Theo will not survive such a strike, he still decides to interfere, unwilling to let Theo gain favor in the king's eyes under any circumstance. He questions how mere vassals and bannermen could dare to comment on the bloodline of the clan leader's son, and continues to argue based on the rules of proxy battles. But Kyle Ragnar abruptly silences him, making it clear that if a vassal dares to speak against the Ragnars, they should simply be eliminated. Left with no choice, Ed backs down, and Kyle shifts his attention to Julius, asking if he has anything to say after noticing him quietly amused. Julius responds that he is simply surprised to see the king taking interest after such a long time. Without wasting time, Kyle directly asks his son whether he is willing to accept the challenge. The MC realizes that the situation has taken a drastic turn, and although this was not part of his expectations, he smiles and decides to accept it. However, he points out that the condition is far too heavy, explaining that comparing a single strike from the clan leader to a proxy war against vassals and bannermen is completely unreasonable. The king questions whether he is refusing, but the MC denies it, clarifying that he only seeks a fair adjustment since the trial has suddenly become much harsher. With a confident and slightly playful expression, he demands that his compensation be increased accordingly. Kyle asks what he wants, and the MC turns toward Ed before stating that he desires something on the level of the Camellia Palace. This declaration leaves Ed speechless, while frustration builds within him. Wolfgang considers the proposal utter madness, believing that such negotiations with the clan leader himself are unacceptable, as agreements are meant to occur between equals. He is convinced that Theo's arrogance will lead to his downfall. To everyone's surprise, however, the clan leader agrees to Theo's demand, reasoning that if Theo truly aims to become his successor, he must possess this level of courage and boldness. Kyle then asks the Sky Dragon if he has any objections, but the man submits immediately, stating that everything ultimately belongs to his lord and he would not dare oppose his decision. Satisfied, Kyle orders preparations for a stage, declaring that he will personally test his son. Theo feels a slight hesitation, but soon stands facing his father on the battleground, while the other vassals gather at the sides to observe. Ed is overwhelmed with frustration as he realizes that the trap he had carefully set has instead turned into an opportunity that favors Theo. Still, he reassures himself, believing that regardless of Theo's recent growth, there is no way he can endure even a single strike from the clan leader, something that even high-ranking swordsmen struggle to survive. In Ed's mind, Theo is as good as dead. However, the MC sees through his intentions and remains confident, trusting in the reward he obtained during the tutorial. The king notices that something about his son has changed, and wonders if he secretly consumed an elixir. Although he doubts that even an elixir could cause such a drastic transformation, he decides it is irrelevant, as the method does not matter to him. Theo realizes that his father has easily seen through him, something even the 9 dragons failed to notice. The king asks if he is ready, and Theo confirms that he is. Kyle remarks that he usually fights with his greatsword, but since Theo has not yet learned to use mana, he will go easy on him by using a worn steel sword instead. He asks if Theo has any objections, and upon receiving none, he becomes serious and prepares to strike. A massive aura spreads across the battlefield as the clan leader advances, filling the area with overwhelming pressure. Theo feels the weight of his father's presence, realizing that even his mere fighting spirit is enough to dominate the surroundings. The clan leader expresses slight surprise that his son is still able to stand under such pressure, while Theo remains confident, knowing that his strength has nearly tripled thanks to the reward he received after clearing the tutorial, the experience elixir. By consuming it, he gained 5 levels, and invested all of his points into strength. With this newfound power, he feels as though he has stepped beyond the realm of the weak and into something far greater, giving him the confidence to endure at least one strike from his father. As the clan leader launches his attack, everyone watches in stunned silence, while Ed becomes convinced that Theo will die. Theo concentrates entirely on defense, managing to perceive the incoming strike at the last moment. A massive red beam crashes into the ground, obliterating the entire stage in an instant. Once the dust settles, the clan leader smiles, realizing that he has finally found a son worthy of recognition. Theo remains standing, leaving everyone in complete shock. Through sheer will and determination, he proves his worth and withstands the attack. With that, the trial comes to an end, and a system notification appears, confirming that the sudden quest involving a single strike from Kyle Ragnar has been successfully completed. As a reward for his achievement, Theo receives an inventory and a mysterious blue key. After some time, Theo slowly wakes up, wondering where he is. Cecilia immediately brightens upon seeing her son regain consciousness. She explains that he collapsed after remaining standing for too long, and begins crying while holding his hand, unable to hide how terrified she had been when she learned that the clan leader himself had challenged him. Deeply worried, she asks whether he suffered any additional injuries, and assures him that she will call a physician immediately if he has even the slightest fracture or dislocation. Theo reassures her that he is fine, though he still does not recognize the room around him. At that moment, Julius enters and informs him that, under the clan leader's orders, the Lady of the Camellia Palace, Axion, and the Director of Intelligence have all been removed from their positions. Hearing this, Theo quickly realizes where he is and becomes pleased to learn that they are now inside the Camellia Palace. A system notification updates his progress, informing him that the only remaining objective is to uncover the hidden secret. Meanwhile, in the garden of the Camellia Palace, Emil creates a scene as she refuses to accept being forced out of what she considers her own property. The servants desperately try to calm her down, repeatedly begging her not to cause any more trouble. Elsewhere, Ed watches the situation unfold and secretly orders Axion to kill Theo Ragnar. Axion begins discussing his plans for the awakening ceremony, but Ed immediately cuts him off and commands him to eliminate Theo completely by taking his head. Axion notices the intense hatred and desire for revenge burning in Ed's eyes. Once everything settles within the Camellia Palace, Theo reflects on the outcome and realizes that although events did not unfold according to his original plan, the results turned out far better than he had expected. He managed to obtain control of the Camellia Palace without even using his trump card, and on top of that, he gained another authority. Activating his inventory skill, he pulls out an item and casually begins eating an apple. While wondering how such a strange ability is even possible, he admits that it is incredibly useful. Afterward, Theo retrieves the mysterious blue key he recently obtained from the inventory. He is convinced that it must be connected to something important. As he focuses on a nearby door, the keyhole suddenly begins glowing. Deciding to investigate, he unlocks the door and pushes it open, only to find a deep tunnel hidden beyond it. Immediately, the system announces that he has discovered a dungeon for the first time, and rewards him by doubling any experience gained within it. Finding a hidden cave beneath the Camellia Palace, Theo assumes it is tied to another quest and decides to clear it, unwilling to miss such a valuable opportunity for experience. Before entering, however, he remembers that rushing into a dungeon unprepared would be foolish. After some time, he returns with his inventory stocked full of weapons and equipment before finally stepping inside. As he advances deeper into the dungeon, he suddenly notices a massive wolf staring directly at him. The creature is so large that it appears comparable to a demonic beast. Without hesitation, the wolf leaps toward him, but Theo successfully blocks the attack with his shield. He immediately realizes that the beast possesses tremendous strength, yet he forces it back, refusing to lose in a contest of power. The wolf roars and charges at him once again. Theo quickly swings his sword and lands a slash, but the attack fails to inflict any meaningful damage. He realizes that the creature's hide is incredibly thick, and that its speed is equally dangerous, making it impossible to defeat with half-hearted attacks. He concludes that this is no ordinary wolf, and may very well possess strength comparable to a true demonic beast. Defeating it will not be easy. Suddenly, the monster lunges forward again, attacking with its claws. As Theo faces the assault, he recalls the terrifying ray of light he witnessed during his father's strike. He considers it incredible, and attempts to reproduce that pure white arc against the wolf, but fails completely. Accepting that it will not be so simple, he realizes that a single strike is more than just an attack. It is a blow, meant to guarantee death. At last, he begins to understand the principle behind his father's technique. The secret lies in concentrating every bit of strength into one decisive sword strike. Abandoning his shield, he focuses entirely on improving his swordsmanship while recalling the secret sword techniques Evelyn taught him, techniques that rely heavily on speed and precision. Then, rushing forward, he drives his sword directly into the wolf's eye. The monster lets out a painful scream and staggers backward. Seeing the reaction, Theo realizes that his strategy is working. Without giving the beast any time to recover, he attacks once more, convinced that victory is finally within reach. 2 months later, at the training grounds, Eod notices that the number of people gathering there has increased significantly. Sybil agrees and remarks that they may soon need a larger training area. Recently, rumors have been spreading throughout the clan that the clan leader personally taught young Master Theo a single strike. Because of that story, more and more people have started showing up, eager to challenge him to sparring matches. As Sybil continues talking about Theo, someone suddenly approaches from behind and mockingly calls him a lackey. The newcomer is Henry Morris from the Plum Blossom Palace. Henry sarcastically asks when their supposedly incredible young master plans to appear, pointing out that 2 months have already passed. He expresses disappointment, saying he had assumed Theo never missed a day of training. Henry goes on to call Theo a coward, claiming that he must have run away after the rumor spread too far. Sybil immediately grows angry, but Henry keeps talking. He suggests that the entire story might be fabricated since there were no actual witnesses. In his opinion, Theo simply exaggerated everything. He even questions whether the destruction of the Scaled Dragon Society really happened, dismissing it as more fake news. At that point, Sybil finally loses his patience and throws a punch with all his strength, smashing Henry directly in the face. Another member of the Plum Blossom Palace immediately becomes furious and insults Sybil, calling him a dropout. However, everyone present at the training grounds instantly turns their attention toward him with hostile looks. Sybil fires back, calling the man a shitface and declaring that nobody could ever compare to their young master. Eod is genuinely surprised to hear his friend insulting someone's appearance despite having such a face himself. Sybil admits that he was already irritated by the constant visits from the Plum Blossom Palace members who kept showing up just to stir up trouble. He firmly states that he will never allow anyone to disrespect young Master Theo. Drawing their swords, Sybil and his companions openly declare war on the Plum Blossom Palace group. The other side responds in kind, determined to put what they call the dropout losers back in their place. Just as the fight is about to begin, someone suddenly steps between them. In an instant, all of their weapons freeze solid. Everyone is stunned, and Sybil immediately recognizes the newcomer as Ray Ragnar, one of the 4 hounds. Another person soon joins the scene, laughing loudly as he arrives. It is Hulkus Lanka, another member of the Four Hounds. Sybil is shocked to see two members of the Four Hounds appear at the training grounds so suddenly. Looking around, Hulkus notices that someone is missing. He asks one of the Plum Blossom Palace members where the Luster Tiger is, leaving the man completely confused. Growing impatient, Hulkus loudly asks whether everyone there has gone deaf, reminding them that he is looking for the master of the training grounds. He then proudly announces that he has come to challenge Theo Ragnar. Meanwhile, deep inside the dungeon, the MC finally reaches his limit. His sword shatters, and at the same time, the system informs him that he has leveled up. Multiple system windows immediately begin appearing one after another, showing increases to his stats and confirming that he has now hunted 170 demonic beasts. Theo sits atop the corpses of the monsters he has defeated while checking the notifications. The system informs him that only a single monster remains. He drinks a healing potion to recover his strength and reflects on how many times he nearly died during the past 2 months. Every time he found himself on the brink of death, the healing potions managed to save him. In the beginning, defeating the monsters had been extremely difficult, but as he continued leveling up, the battles gradually became easier. Even so, he is surprised by how quickly time has passed. 2 entire months have already gone by inside the dungeon. Looking at the system notification again, he sees that only one demonic beast remains. He immediately suspects that the final enemy must be the dungeon boss, especially when he notices a staircase leading deeper ahead. Theo moves forward and eventually arrives at the 5th floor. Looking down at his shattered sword, he realizes it can no longer be used. Activating his inventory, he searches for a replacement weapon. After checking his remaining equipment, he discovers that only one sword is left. The sight of it causes him to pause. It is the sword his mother gave him as a birthday gift. Memories from his previous life begin surfacing. Before the awakening ceremony, he had frequently clashed with his mother. Back then, he had carelessly thrown the sword into a corner of his room and allowed it to gather dust. Looking at it now, he realizes that it is actually a high-quality ceremonial sword forged from white snow steel. Theo falls silent as the memories continue. In his previous life, his mother had excitedly entered his room to wish him a happy birthday. She had even stayed awake until midnight so she could personally give him his presents. Instead of appreciating her effort, he became irritated and told her that birthday gifts were a waste of time with the awakening ceremony approaching. He had expected more from her, and bitterly stated that no piece of equipment could ever change his bloodline. He even remembered telling her to leave him alone. Thinking back on those moments now, he quietly resolves not to repeat the mistakes of his previous life. Finally, he reaches the boss room. As he steps inside, a system notification appears, warning him to remain cautious because a powerful demonic beast is about to emerge. Inside the boss room, Theo discovers a dragon peacefully sleeping. After taking a closer look, he feels relieved when he realizes it is only a lesser drake. Even so, he cannot help but wonder why the final boss of the quest is a draconic creature. Since the Ragnars are known as descendants of dragons, he briefly questions whether there is some deeper connection or if it is simply a coincidence. Pushing those thoughts aside, he focuses on the battle ahead. The system displays the quest information and confirms that this is the final remaining monster. Theo knows there is no way out of the dungeon without defeating it, but he still questions whether he can actually win against a creature that belongs to the dragon species. After calming himself, Theo decides to use the technique he has been practicing for the past 2 months, the single flash. Although he knows it is nowhere near the level of his father's dragon flash, he has refined it through countless battles against wolves and other monsters. Believing that fully utilizing his dragon heart will allow him to inflict meaningful damage, he charges straight at the lesser drake. His sword pierces directly through one of the monster's eyes, causing it to roar in agony. The successful hit wounds the creature, but before Theo can celebrate, the drake retaliates with a powerful tail strike. He narrowly dodges the attack, and quickly realizes that despite hitting such a vulnerable area, his strike lacked enough power to reach the monster's brain. The lesser drake's rage intensifies as it prepares to kill him, yet Theo remains focused. Seeing possibilities for victory, he rushes forward again, landing several attacks while attempting to distract the beast and search for a true weakness that could end the battle quickly. Suddenly, the lesser drake unleashes a terrifying roar that changes the atmosphere of the entire battlefield. Fear spreads through the area like a physical force, and Theo immediately feels its effect. His body locks up completely, frozen by overwhelming terror. Even though he can clearly see the incoming attack, he is unable to move out of the way. At the last second, he manages to raise his sword and block, but the impact launches him across the room and slams him into a rocky wall. The collision leaves him stunned, and he finally acknowledges just how powerful the dungeon boss truly is. Realizing that he cannot continue taking such attacks for long, he forces himself back onto his feet. As the massive drake advances toward him, Theo desperately searches for a way to end the battle before his strength runs out. Remembering his knowledge of dragons, he recalls that their greatest weakness lies in their reverse scales. Determined to gamble everything on that knowledge, Theo leaps onto the drake's body while weaving through its attacks. Despite the danger, he manages to reach the reverse scales and drives his sword into them. Blood immediately bursts from the wound as the monster screams in pain. Encouraged by the result, Theo repeatedly attacks the same spot, convinced that he has found the key to victory. victory. The lesser Drake continues roaring in agony, and for a moment, he believes his strategy has worked perfectly. However, to his surprise, the monster refuses to collapse. Even after suffering such critical damage, the Drake remains standing, proving far more resilient than he anticipated. Meanwhile, back at the training grounds, Hulkus becomes increasingly irritated with Ray and insists that he should be the first one allowed to challenge Theo. Ray dismisses him as a loser and tells him to stay out of her way, but Hulkus immediately argues back. He points out that his defeat happened 3 years ago and claims that he has spent every single day improving himself since then. In his mind, 3 years is more than enough time to close the gap between them. Ray pays no attention to his excuses and simply calls him a loser again, making him even angrier. Eventually, Hulkus proposes a duel, declaring that whoever wins will earn the right to challenge Theo Ragnar. He swings his massive weapon at her, but Ray effortlessly blocks the attack without showing the slightest sign of strain. Watching from nearby, Sybil and Henry have no idea what is happening anymore, but both become nervous witnessing 2 members of the Four Hounds openly fighting each other. As the confrontation escalates and both prepare to attack again, Remington suddenly appears between them. He calmly tells them to take their fight elsewhere, reminding them that this territory belongs to young Master Theo. He firmly states that he will not allow anyone to cause trouble within his master's domain. Hulkus immediately brightens upon seeing Remington and expresses a desire to fight him as well. Remington simply asks him to listen and understand what he is saying. Before the situation can continue, an overwhelming pressure suddenly spreads through the area. Everyone present immediately senses the terrifying killing intent. Even Remington is startled and begins wondering where such a menacing aura could have come from. Instinctively, everyone turns toward the source. There, standing at the entrance of the training grounds, is Theo himself. Remington is shocked by the immense pressure radiating from him and cannot help but wonder what exactly happened during Theo's 2 months of secluded training. Ray and Hulkus, on the other hand, become excited the moment they see him arrive. Theo's presence alone dominates the entire training ground, and the source of that pressure soon becomes clear. During his battle with the Lesser Drake, he acquired the creature's fear skill, and now that terrifying ability blankets the entire area, leaving everyone feeling the overwhelming presence of the young master. Earlier inside the dungeon, after Theo pierced the Lesser Drake's reverse scales, the monster finally collapsed and died. The system immediately congratulated him for successfully hunting the boss monster. The moment his sword struck the reverse scales, the Drake went completely berserk. For several minutes, Theo genuinely thought he was going to die as the enraged creature rampaged wildly. Fortunately, the monster eventually exhausted itself, proving that the reverse scales truly were its greatest weakness. Once the battle ended, the system rewarded him with the Lesser Drake's tooth and Lesser Drake's claw. The tooth could be used as a weapon enhancement material, while the claw could increase a weapon's sharpness. Since he didn't want to lose the sword his mother had given him, Theo immediately decided that these materials would be used to repair and strengthen it. The rewards did not stop there. The system also granted him a new skill called Lesser Drake's Fear. The unexpected reward surprised him, and after reading its description, he learned that it allowed him to inflict fear upon targets weaker than himself. Theo was shocked because abilities like this were normally associated with only a select few exceptional individuals. Excited by the opportunity, he looked forward to testing it out for himself. As he organized his newly acquired items and stored everything inside his inventory, he couldn't help but wonder whether the skill would actually be useful within Ragnar, a place already filled with powerful people. With the dungeon finally cleared, Theo completed the Camellia Palace quest and uncovered its hidden secret. As a reward for successfully clearing Scenario Quest 1, the system granted him a nest compass. He had no idea what the item actually did and questioned whether it would become important in a future quest. Deciding to worry about it later, he stored it in his inventory and planned to head back to his room for some much-needed rest after spending 2 exhausting months inside the dungeon. His plans for rest disappeared almost immediately when a maid rushed over and informed him of an urgent situation. She noticed the numerous wounds covering his body, but Theo casually brushed them aside and asked what was happening. The maid explained that a massive brawl had broken out at Training Ground 4. Upon hearing this, Theo headed straight there. The moment he arrived, he activated Lesser Drake's Fear and unleashed its pressure across the entire training ground. The overwhelming aura instantly dominated everyone present as he angrily demanded that they all leave because he needed rest. The killing intent was so intense that several people lost consciousness on the spot. However, Hulkus reacted differently. Rather than being intimidated, he became excited and immediately charged toward Theo, eager to determine which of them was stronger. Swinging his weapon with full force, Hulkus attacked, but Theo effortlessly overpowered the strike with a single swing of his own. The spectators were left stunned as Hulkus was blasted backward, unable to believe that his attack had been deflected so easily. Even Theo was surprised by the results of his dungeon training. Despite this, Hulkus refused to back down. Throughout the North, he was known as the weakest member of the Four Hounds, largely because of his lack of intelligence and his tendency to rely on brute force rather than developing a wider skill set. Even so, nobody had ever surpassed him when it came to raw physical strength. Determined to prove himself, Hulkus charged again and challenged Theo to stop another attack. To Theo's surprise, he found himself capable of matching Hulkus head-on. Then, with a single clean slash, he countered the attack and completely defeated him. The incredible growth from leveling up filled Theo with satisfaction as Hulkus coughed up blood before losing consciousness and collapsing. Realizing he may have used too much force, Theo felt slightly guilty and admitted that he should have held back. Fortunately, Hulkus was famous for his incredible durability and toughness, making him one of the few people capable of surviving such a hit. After checking him, Theo confirmed that he had only fainted. The crowd immediately erupted with excitement. Sybil stared in disbelief, while everyone at the training grounds began cheering for the young master who had defeated the Black Bear, one of the 4 hounds, with a single strike. Theo repeatedly assured them that Hulkus was still alive, but nobody seemed interested in listening. Then, to his disappointment, his sword suddenly broke apart as well. The weapon had been a gift from his mother, making its destruction particularly painful. The crowd somehow became even more excited, praising Theo for wielding such overwhelming power that he shattered his own sword with a single attack. Theo could not understand why everyone was celebrating so enthusiastically. Meanwhile, Ray quietly watched the scene and found herself recalling a memory from her childhood. Years ago, Theo had found her wandering outside in the freezing cold, while wearing almost nothing to protect herself from the weather. Concerned, he had wrapped his own scarf around her and decided she still looked too cold. He brought her to his home and planned to return her once the snowfall stopped. Remembering that moment now, Ray smiled to herself before quietly leaving the training ground. Remington happened to notice her expression and was surprised to see her smiling at all. Later, back at the Camellia Palace, Theo found himself growing embarrassed as the maids congratulated him on earning a new title, Luster Tiger. One of them happily remarked that all his hard work was finally paying off and encouraged him to keep pushing forward until the awakening ceremony arrived. She genuinely believed he could succeed. Before Theo could properly respond, Cecilia suddenly appeared and immediately began feeding him a newly prepared abalone dish. No matter how much he tried to resist, she continued stuffing more food into his mouth. While eating, Theo found himself reflecting on his previous life and feeling grateful for the changes that had occurred. He admitted that the food was delicious, causing Cecilia to beam with happiness. However, her attention soon shifted to the broken sword. The moment she saw it, her expression changed completely. Theo immediately became nervous and explained that it broke during training. He apologized sincerely, knowing how meaningful the birthday gift was. To his surprise, Cecilia did not become angry at him. Instead, she became furious at the craftsman who claimed the sword would never break despite being forged from white snow steel and ebony steel wood. When Theo asked whether she meant the rare steel wood from the southern jungle, she confirmed it and explained how valuable both materials were. She felt completely deceived because if the craftsman had truly used such materials properly, the sword should never have broken so easily. Theo was shocked after learning just how expensive and rare those materials actually were, and wondered how his mother had managed to obtain such a weapon in the first place. Determined to get answers, Cecilia announced that she would personally confront the craftsman and demand an explanation. She also intended to make him forge an even better sword worthy of her precious son. Theo tried to reassure her that it wasn't necessary and that he could simply use another weapon, but she refused to hear it. In her eyes, people were finally beginning to recognize his talent, meaning he needed to be more careful than ever. With the awakening ceremony rapidly approaching, she absolutely would not allow him to attend while carrying a worn-out replacement sword. Seeing how much she genuinely cared for him made Theo happy. Once the discussion ended, Cecilia suddenly announced that it was time to leave. Theo looked confused until she revealed their destination. They were heading to the finest workshop in all of Winterra, the legendary Basque Workshop. The Basque Workshop was one of the 3 greatest manufacturing workshops in all of Winterra, a place so massive that it rivaled an entire factory. However, its true fame came not from its size, but from its master. The workshop was run by a figure classified as special rank by the intelligence agency, and one of only 3 Ragnar artisans who possessed the prestigious title of Master Craftsman. Upon arriving, Theo was stunned to discover that the owner was none other than the demon craftsman Kirsten, often called the incarnation of capitalist greed itself. He had never imagined meeting such an influential tycoon in person, and even more shocking was the realization that his mother seemed to know her personally. His confusion only deepened when Cecilia angrily asked why Kirsten was still smoking. The moment he heard Cecilia address Kirsten as her mother, Theo was left completely speechless. Kirsten immediately told Cecilia to stop calling her that, insisting that their relationship was not truly one of parent and child. Theo remembered being told that his mother was an orphan with no family after she ran away years ago, so learning that she was connected to the high elf Kirsten completely overturned everything he thought he knew. He suddenly realized that part of the reason for his unusually handsome appearance was likely because he was actually 1/4 elf. Kirsten questioned why Cecilia had suddenly decided to visit after so long. In response, Cecilia threw the broken sword at her and bluntly declared it a defective product. Kirsten immediately became irritated, refusing to believe such a claim about a weapon she had personally forged. However, after picking it up and examining it, she discovered that the sword really was broken. Cecilia sarcastically asked whether it still wasn't defective, leaving Kirsten momentarily speechless. Curious about the weapon's owner, Kirsten asked who had wielded it. Cecilia pointed to Theo and explained that it belonged to him. Kirsten recognized the boy standing behind her and was immediately corrected when Cecilia proudly declared that Theo was a genius destined to one day rule Ragnar itself. Theo politely introduced himself and expressed his gratitude for meeting the famous master of the Basque workshop. Kirsten recalled hearing about him and praised Cecilia for raising such a remarkable child. When she confirmed that Theo was the sole user of the sword, Kirsten's expression changed. Realizing the matter was more complicated than it appeared, she invited them inside, already sensing that a long discussion awaited them. As they walked through the workshop, Theo asked his mother whether Kirsten was truly related to her. Cecilia admitted that he was correct and explained that, while she never spoke much about it, Kirsten had acted as her foster mother for a period of time. According to Cecilia, Kirsten had a peculiar habit of collecting anything she considered beautiful, whether it was music, jewels, theater performances, or even people. Beauty fascinated her. That obsession was the reason she had taken Cecilia in as a foster child in the first place. Kirsten immediately interrupted and dismissed the conversation as pointless reminiscing. Cecilia accused her of lying, prompting Theo to ask how she eventually left the workshop. Kirsten answered the question herself, revealing that Cecilia had abandoned everything because she wanted to marry the leader of the Ragnar clan. She admitted that she never expected her foster daughter to willingly run away to such a miserable place, and was genuinely surprised that she had survived there for so many years. Cecilia defended herself by claiming she simply could not resist the clan leader's manliness and handsome appearance, as well as the affection he showed her. Kirsten remained unimpressed and reminded her that, despite running away, she had shamelessly returned the previous year begging for a custom sword to give Theo as a birthday gift. Cecilia quickly became annoyed at hearing this brought up in front of her son, and the two immediately started arguing. Watching the exchange, Theo could not help smiling. He had never seen his mother behave so casually and naturally before. Reflecting on his previous life, he realized how little he had cared to learn about her and how ungrateful he had been. He also noticed that despite all her complaints, Kirsten clearly cared deeply for Cecilia. That realization made him wonder why she had never intervened during the tragedies of his past life. Eventually, they arrived at Kirsten's private room. Cecilia immediately demanded that she forge the finest sword possible for Theo as compensation for the broken one. Instead of answering, Kirsten suddenly grabbed Theo, pushed him inside, and slammed the door shut, leaving Cecilia outside. Ignoring Cecilia's shouting, Kirsten decided to skip all formalities and ask a direct question. She wanted to know whether Theo possessed a relic of the primordial dragon. The question confused him. He wondered whether she was referring to the ancestor of the guardian dragon that protected the clan, and explained that he had only heard legends claiming relics of that dragon had been scattered throughout Winterra for Ragnar descendants. Kirsten firmly stated that it was no legend, and demanded to know whether he truly possessed no relic at all. Growing increasingly frustrated, she questioned how he had managed to break the sword she had poured her heart and soul into creating. In her opinion, nothing short of a relic should have been capable of damaging it. She repeatedly emphasized how valuable the sword had been, while Theo could only apologize and recall that it broke during his battle with the Lesser Drake. Realizing explanations were getting nowhere, Kirsten finally decided to show him the answer herself. She led him to a massive casket, completely wrapped in heavy chains, and asked whether he noticed anything unusual about it. The moment Theo looked at it, he saw the same mysterious blue glow he had previously witnessed around the hidden dungeon entrance inside the Camellia Palace. Instantly suspecting it was connected to another quest, he stared at it intently. Kirsten admitted that she could not see anything herself, but Theo's reaction confirmed her suspicions. She dragged the enormous casket closer and explained that despite countless attempts, she had never managed to break its seal or obtain the item hidden inside. She then revealed the truth behind the relic. Long ago, the primordial dragon supposedly removed one of its own fangs and forged it into a legendary blade known as the White Moonlight Blade, often referred to as the Monster Sword. According to Kirsten, if Theo succeeded in breaking the seal, she would give him the sword. However, she also warned him that failure could easily cost him his life. Rather than being intimidated, Theo grinned excitedly. In his mind, the sword already belonged to him. At that moment, the system generated a new scenario quest, requiring him to be chosen by the primordial dragon's relic, the White Moonlight Blade. Theo quickly realized the significance of the weapon. It was the personal sword of the leader of Black Snow, one of the 9 dragons known as the Black Dragon. Very few people even knew the sword existed because everyone who learned too much about it either disappeared or died. He remembered a mysterious encounter encounter years ago when a strange man noticed him despite supposedly being invisible to everyone else. Through sheer coincidence, Theo had glimpsed the sword's true form back then and never understood why the Black Dragon allowed him to live. Now he finally understood that Kirsten had possessed the white moonlight blade all along. When Kirsten asked one final time whether he intended to open the seal, Theo's determination only grew stronger. He declared that the sword was already his. Studying the casket more closely, he noticed striking similarities between it and the sealed door within the Camellia Palace. Acting on instinct, he retrieved the blue key and inserted it into the casket. Kirsten watched in confusion as the lock clicked open. A strange light immediately burst out from within, illuminating the room. Before either of them could react, thick black fog emerged from the casket and wrapped around Theo. Kirsten's expression instantly changed to alarm as the fog began dragging him toward the opening. Theo struggled desperately to break free, but the force was overwhelming. Within moments, he was swallowed completely and pulled into an unknown realm. When Theo opened his eyes again, he found himself standing within the Rose Palace. The entire place was engulfed in flames. He stared around in disbelief, unable to understand why he was reliving these memories again. As scenes from his past replayed before him, he was reminded of how weak and powerless he once was. The experience reignited his determination. He needed more strength, enough strength to defeat Rendon and completely crush the Camellia Palace. Suddenly, a griffin appeared and began manipulating his mind, attempting to exploit his desire for power. However, Theo abruptly woke from the illusion and caught the griffin by its beak, completely catching it off guard. He immediately realized what was happening. This was the reason the white moonlight blade was called the Monster Sword. The griffin was trying to corrupt and dominate anyone who sought its power by preying on their deepest desires. The mysterious creature called him insolent and struggled to free itself, but Theo showed no intention of letting go. Calmly, he explained that he had already conquered the despair and regrets being shown to him long ago. He questioned whether the creature truly thought he would be tempted by meaningless power after everything he had already experienced through countless quests. The griffin seemed genuinely confused by his reaction. While holding it in place, Theo noticed another odd detail. The griffin looked very different from the one he remembered. The creature from his memories had been at least 10 meters tall, yet this one was barely his own size. He briefly wondered whether it had somehow shrunk after remaining trapped for so many years, but ultimately decided it wasn't worth thinking about. Tightening his grip, he declared that the white moonlight blade now belonged to him and prepared to punch the griffin with a fierce grin on his face. Faced with such an absurd situation, the monster quickly abandoned its hostility and desperately tried to talk its way out instead. Meanwhile, back inside Kirsten's room, Cecilia panics the moment she sees Theo collapse, unconscious. She desperately tries to wake him, but no matter what she does, he remains unresponsive. Fear quickly turns into tears as she demands to know why her son is lying there like that. Kirsten finds herself unable to answer as Cecilia breaks down, insisting that she never asked for any of this. All she wanted was a proper sword for her son. As Kirsten examines Theo's condition, she notices something unbelievable. A strange monster-like energy is connected directly to his bloodstream, something she has never seen or even heard of before. She had assumed Theo would be safe because he already possessed a relic, but now she is no longer certain. Cecilia, overwhelmed with worry, warns her foster mother that if anything happens to her son, she will never forgive her. Just then, the white moonlight sword reacts. A mysterious light begins gathering around Theo's chest, causing Cecilia to panic even more as she continues trying to wake him. Moments later, Theo finally opens his eyes. Cecilia immediately throws her arms around him and starts crying from relief. She admits how worried she was, while Theo reassures her that he is perfectly fine and that there is no reason to worry. At the same time, the system appears and congratulates him for hunting the griffin and completing the quest. As a reward, he officially becomes the owner of the white moonlight sword. Theo quickly realizes how fortunate he was to survive the trial. The griffin had only recently been unsealed, making it much weaker than it should have been, and its psychological attacks were completely ineffective against him because of everything he had already endured. Another notification appears, informing him that he has successfully observed the monster energy contained within the white moonlight sword. Instantly, his magical power begins to rise dramatically. The amount surpasses 200, and his entire body starts glowing with energy. Theo learns that his magic power has begun developing divinity and has already reached the level normally possessed by high-ranking swordsmen. Despite the incredible growth, he feels slightly frustrated because he cannot openly use this power yet. Until the awakening ceremony arrives, he still needs to conceal his true abilities. Kirsten remains visibly impressed and congratulates him on succeeding where countless others had failed. Theo immediately reminds her of the promise she made, and she assures him that elves do not break their word. However, he notices that the white moonlight sword is still acting strangely and asks whether it has truly accepted him as its master. The situation makes him slightly nervous, but Kirsten explains that the sword spent 400 years trapped inside that sealed casket. Now that it is finally free, it is simply venting centuries of frustration. To help him understand its power, she suggests swinging it at a nearby wall using everything he has. Theo hesitates and wonders whether that is really a good idea, but Kirsten mocks his concern. In her opinion, even if the sword is legendary, An inexperienced boy who has not even completed his awakening ceremony should never be capable of damaging the Basque workshop. Hearing her confidence makes Theo a little uncomfortable, but he decides to test the weapon anyway. He approaches the wall and begins channeling all of his magic power into the blade. After apologizing in advance, he removes the sword's covering and prepares to strike. At first, Kirsten simply watches. However, the moment she senses the amount of energy gathering around him, her expression changes. She suddenly tries to stop him, but it is already too late. Theo unleashes Single Flash through the white moonlight sword, and the resulting attack completely tears through the workshop wall. Cecilia stands frozen in shock, while Kirsten can only stare in horror. Contrary to all her expectations, Theo does not merely damage the structure. He literally splits the massive wall in half with a single swing, despite not even aiming to destroy it. The sight leaves Kirsten on the verge of tears as she watches yet another expensive disaster unfold, especially after already dealing with the broken birthday sword. Even Theo is stunned by the result. The attack feels absurdly powerful, and immediately afterward he finds himself completely drained. The white moonlight sword consumed every drop of magic power he possessed in order to unleash that devastating strike. Before he can fully process what happened, Kirsten rushes toward him at incredible speed and begins transferring mana into his body. The movement is so fast that Theo barely notices her approach. As she examines him, she realizes that he truly has almost no control over his newfound magic power. Nevertheless, after looking at the enormous crack running through a wall nearly 10 feet thick, she becomes convinced that the boy standing before her is an undeniable genius. For the first time, she feels genuine pride in having a grandson like him. That pride, however, is quickly accompanied by another emotion. As Kirsten studies Theo, countless business opportunities begin forming in her mind. The greedy gleam in her eyes becomes impossible to hide. Placing a hand on his shoulder, she declares that she will personally become his patron from now on. All he needs to do is spread his wings and display his talents to the world. Theo immediately sees through her intentions. It is painfully obvious that she plans to use him as living advertisement for the Basque workshop. The excitement in her eyes resembles someone staring at a mountain of gold, rather than a grandson. Noticing the unmistakable shine of profit in her expression, Theo bluntly points out that he can practically see the dollar signs glowing in her eyes. As night settled over Winterra, Theo and Cecilia prepared to leave the Basque workshop. After exchanging their final farewells with Kirsten, the two departed. Once they were gone, Kirsten looked down at the drake fangs in her possession and smiled with satisfaction. Theo had left them behind as compensation for the massive damage caused to her workshop. Rather than being upset, Kirsten was delighted. The materials from a drake were incredibly valuable, and she was convinced that Theo must have acquired them while obtaining the relic. As she admired the loot, she also found herself feeling proud of Cecilia. The daughter who had once run away had somehow raised an extraordinary son. Just then, someone suddenly arrived and addressed her by her title, Demon Craftsman. The familiar voice instantly caused Kirsten to freeze. Turning around, she demanded to know why he was there. Standing before her was the mysterious crow of Robber Ragnar. He simply stared at her with a faint red glow in his eyes and remained silent, leaving the encounter shrouded in mystery. 5 days passed, and the long-awaited day of the awakening ceremony finally arrived. As usual, Theo and Evelyn were engaged in a sparring session. After exchanging several blows, Evelyn could immediately tell that his swordsmanship had improved once again. His attacks were faster, cleaner, and noticeably stronger than before. Theo responded with a grin, admitting that hearing praise from someone like Evelyn was something he never expected. Around them, the spectators watched with complicated expressions. Most of them felt completely outclassed by Theo's growth. It had only been half a year since he began changing, yet his progress was already terrifying. Evelyn herself was amazed. The boy who once struggled had become strong enough to force her backward during their exchanges. In her eyes, if he successfully awakened his magic power today, an absolute monster would be born. After the sparring session continued for a while, Evelyn praised him once more, telling him he had done exceptionally well, and might even have a chance of becoming the valedictorian of the awakening ceremony. She wished him luck and offered her sincere support. Theo responded with a wide smile, and jokingly declared that if he became valedictorian, he would mention her by name during his speech in front of everyone. Evelyn immediately gave him an exhausted look, clearly wondering why such a thing would even be necessary. Before the conversation could end, several of Theo's companions rushed over and eagerly requested that he mention their names as well. Theo could not help feeling slightly proud of himself, internally thinking that popularity was becoming a burden. Meanwhile, Evelyn simply stared at him with growing concern, convinced that he was becoming far too full of himself. The scene later shifted to the Ragnar clan's central headquarters, where Theo made his arrival. Introducing himself as Theo Ragnar of the Camellia Palace, he passed through the entrance and stepped inside. Immediately, he noticed the enormous crowd gathered for the ceremony. The awakening ceremony was the most important annual event within the Ragnar clan, and every participant dreamed of achieving outstanding results. For young swordsmen, this was their first opportunity to gain recognition and earn honor within the clan. The pressure was immense, especially since nearly every influential figure in Ragnar was present. The clan head, Kyle Ragnar, was there alongside the 9 dragons. Even Hilda Ragnar, the former clan head from 2 generations ago, had attended. Theo found himself studying Hilda closely. The more he looked at her, the harder it became to believe she was over 150 years old. Regardless, he felt relieved to see her attending once again. A loud drumbeat suddenly echoed through the area, drawing everyone's attention. The man responsible was Vanna Ragnar, the judge overseeing the ceremony and a Dragon Gate swordsman. With everyone's focus now on him, he announced the beginning of the preliminary examination. The first stage was simple in theory. Participants would take one of the swords provided, step onto the platform, and attempt to leave a mark on a steel wall positioned there. However, the challenge was far greater than it sounded. Vanna explained that the wall had been forged using white snow steel, making it impossible for an ordinary blade to scratch it. The only way to damage it was by channeling magical power through the weapon. To assist the participants, soma would be distributed. Each soma pill contained power equivalent to 10 years worth of magical energy and had been specifically designed to help awaken and open one's mana hall. Vanna instructed everyone to consume the soma and focus on opening the mana hall within their dantian. Once their mana halls awakened, they would be capable of channeling magical power through their swords and cutting into the white snow steel wall. The depth of the mark left behind would directly determine their evaluation and ranking. After explaining the rules, Vanna loudly declared that he would begin calling names, and each participant would step forward, receive a soma pill, and take their turn on the platform. The very first name announced was Theo Ragnar. Without hesitation, Theo stepped forward. As he accepted the soma pill, memories of his previous life resurfaced. Back then, Axion had stood at the very top and graduated as the valedictorian of the awakening ceremony. This time, however, Theo had no intention of repeating history. Grabbing a sword, he approached the steel wall with determination burning in his eyes. As he walked toward the platform, a system notification suddenly appeared before him. Scenario Quest 3 had begun. The objective was straightforward, but ambitious. Become the valedictorian of the awakening ceremony and clear the quest. At the same time, the perspective shifted to Hilda Ragnar. The 150-year-old former clan head glanced toward Theo and asked Kyle whether this was the boy he had mentioned before. Kyle confirmed it immediately and wondered if she had become interested as well. Hilda admitted that after hearing so much about Theo, her curiosity had certainly been piqued. She wanted to see with her own eyes whether this descendant truly possessed the talent and potential that everyone had been talking about. Theo rolled his shoulders and stretched his muscles while standing before the platform, unable to completely shake off his nervousness. Vanna Ragnar quickly appeared beside him and reminded him to take the soma pill. Theo swallowed it without hesitation, remembering how different things had been in his previous life. Back then, he had consumed soma but failed to control the overwhelming mana it released, severely damaging his dantian in the process. This time, however, he was confident that such a disaster would never happen again. The moment the pill dissolved, an enormous surge of power exploded within him, causing mana to spread throughout the area. Even Vanna was startled by the scale of the mana wave. He knew better than anyone how dangerous soma could be. Participants had to carefully guide the mana into their dantian and stabilize their mana hall. The more talented a Ragnar was, the more mana they possessed, and the greater the risk became. A single mistake could leave them crippled for life. Watching the violent surge of energy surrounding Theo, Vanna became convinced that the boy was about to ruin himself. To everyone's surprise, Theo stabilized the mana almost instantly. A wave of relief and happiness washed over him as he realized that he now possessed both a dragon heart and a fully awakened mana hall. Compared to the struggle he endured in his previous life, the process felt unbelievably simple. More importantly, he no longer needed to suppress the vast reserves of mana stored within his dragon heart. For the first time, he could use his power openly. Gathering his strength, Theo leaped into the air and released everything at once. A dragon formed from pure mana and surged forward, racing toward the white snow steel wall. In a single flash, the attack struck its target and carved an enormous crack through the metal. Vanna was left completely stunned by the display and immediately declared that Theo Ragnar had passed. The spectators were equally shocked by the sheer force and control he had demonstrated. As Theo landed, a system notification appeared before him, announcing that the curse of bad luck that had plagued him was finally gone, and that his fame was beginning to spread throughout the world. A genuine smile appeared on his face. For the first time, he felt like he had finally reached the same starting line as everyone else. The system continued providing updates, revealing that numerous influential figures had taken notice of his performance. Osa Ragnar wished to accept him as a disciple. Julius Ragnar was unhappy with the amount of attention being directed toward him, and Robber Ragnar remained cautious about him. Most importantly, Hilda Ragnar herself had become interested. Theo was thrilled. Catching the attention of the Black Dragon and the Sword Dragon was already a major achievement, but gaining the interest of Hilda Ragnar was even more exciting. After all, she possessed the heart of Garuda. The thought of obtaining something that valuable someday filled him with anticipation. One after another, the remaining participants stepped forward to attempt the examination. Most managed only tiny scratches on the wall, some barely visible at all. One unfortunate participant stared at his thin mark and nearly cried, realizing how far he still had to go before reaching Theo's level. Ray Ragnar, Hulkus, Lanka, and Remington Narcio all delivered impressive performances, yet none of them came close to matching the enormous cut Theo had left behind. Watching all 4 Hounds of the North achieve incredible results, while still falling short of Theo, left many participants feeling completely hopeless. Eventually, it was Axion Ragnar's turn. The moment he stepped forward, whispers spread throughout the crowd. Many spectators were already calling this a battle between the Luster Tiger and the Dark Tiger. Others doubted that even Axion would be able to match Theo's achievement. Hearing himself compared to Theo only fueled Axion's anger. Gripping his sword tightly, he swallowed the Soma pill and unleashed his power. Mana erupted around him, and a gigantic red dragon manifested before charging toward the wall. The resulting strike was so powerful that even Vana found himself speechless. It was the second time that day someone had exceeded his expectations. Axion's attack tore a massive crack through the wall, and Vana immediately announced his success. The audience exploded with excitement because the damage looked nearly identical to Theo's. Suddenly, everyone realized that the final ranking would come down to precision scoring. As evening approached, Vana officially declared the end of the first stage of the awakening ceremony. He expressed satisfaction at the overall performance of this year's participants, and instructed all successful candidates to prepare for the second stage, which would begin in 4 days. With the examination complete, the moment everyone had been waiting for finally arrived. The rankings for the first stage were about to be announced. The entire arena held its breath as anticipation reached its peak. All eyes were fixed on Theo and Axion, the clear frontrunners of the competition. Both stood silently, waiting to hear the results. In the end, Theo Ragnar emerged victorious. Even he was briefly stunned by the announcement. The arena immediately erupted into thunderous cheers. Vana proudly declared that Theo had received a perfect score of 10 out of 10 from the judges. His technique, magical power, control, speed, and overall execution had been flawless in every category. While Theo's supporters celebrated wildly, many participants struggled to believe that he had surpassed Axion. The excitement only intensified when it was revealed that the depth of Theo's cut had come remarkably close to the record once set by young master Thorkel Ragnar. The mention of Thorkel sent another wave of excitement through the crowd. Thorkel Ragnar was a legendary figure, one of the 5 major successor candidates within Ragnar, and widely considered the individual closest to inheriting the clan leadership. Meanwhile, Axion Ragnar was announced as the salutatorian. Like Theo, he had earned a perfect score of 10 out of 10. However, because his sword mark was slightly shorter, he had been pushed into second place. The realization made his frustration boil over. Below them, Remington Narcio secured 3rd place, Ray Ragnar claimed 4th, and Hulkus Lanka took 5th. Once again, the Hounds of the North dominated the upper rankings. Further down the list, Theo's first follower and the infamous fool of the Southern Inspection Post, Sybil Drea, barely managed to secure the final qualifying position in 87th place. Vana then revealed the details of the next challenge. 4 days later, the second stage of the awakening ceremony would begin in the dangerous Winter Mountains. All 87 successful participants were instructed to spend the remaining time preparing themselves as thoroughly as possible. With that announcement, the examinees were dismissed. The first day of the awakening ceremony came to an end, and the event had already taken a completely unexpected turn, with Theo Ragnar standing proudly at the very top. That night, Theo's entire faction headed straight to a tavern to celebrate their success. The building echoed with cheers as everyone toasted the 1st and 3rd place winners. For the people of Training Ground number 4, this felt like complete vindication. The world had finally witnessed the strength they had been talking about for months. Drinks and praise flowed endlessly as everyone celebrated Theo and Remington. Theo thanked his companions for their support, but he knew the awakening ceremony was far from over. The first stage was only the beginning. Pulling Remington closer, he confidently declared that the two of them would aim to become the final valedictorian and salutatorian of the entire ceremony. Even Evelyn seemed caught up in the festive atmosphere. Watching their progress over the past months, she genuinely believed they had a chance to accomplish it. Remington personally congratulated Theo on his incredible performance earlier that day. Seeing all of Theo's hard work finally pay off filled him with pride, but at the same time, he could not stop himself from feeling slightly ashamed for falling so far behind his friend. Theo quickly dismissed those thoughts, claiming that he had simply gotten lucky and reminding Remington that rankings should not matter between friends. Hearing that eased Remington's worries. The two raised glasses of orange juice together and promised to give everything they had during the second stage. Later that night, Theo found himself alone among the snowy mountains. Away from the noise and celebrations, he finally had time to process what had happened. Securing first place in the awakening ceremony was something he never would have dared dream about in his previous life. Even if the examination was not a true battle, he had still defeated Axion fairly and squarely. Thinking about how much he had accomplished accomplished in such a short period left him almost speechless. Clenching his fists, he declared to himself that this was only the beginning. Killing Rendon and exposing his betrayal was not enough. Rendon had merely been a pawn serving much larger players. Theo's true enemies remained Axion and the Sky Dragon, backing him from the shadows. Someday he intended to crush both of them completely, no matter what resources or methods he had to use. For now, however, another matter demanded his attention. The nest compass he had received as a quest reward was pointing directly toward the Winter Mountains, the location of the second stage. Whatever secret the artifact held, he would likely uncover it during the upcoming trial. While lost in thought, Theo suddenly sensed something unusual nearby. His instincts immediately sharpened. Someone was watching him. Theo hated being monitored, and without hesitation, he moved into action. The hooded figure following him suddenly lost sight of its target, only to feel the cold edge of a blade pressed against its neck from behind. Theo demanded to know the stranger's identity. The man quickly introduced himself as Gatsby Yotan of the famous Gale Sword Platoon, and insisted he meant no harm. According to Gatsby, his captain had sent him after witnessing Theo's outstanding performance during the first stage of the ceremony. Theo silently stared at him, already understanding what was happening. Recruitment offers were arriving sooner than expected. Gatsby explained that the Gale Sword Platoon wished to offer Theo an opportunity to take their admission qualification test. Instead of feeling honored, Theo found the proposal insulting. A mere qualification test was hardly worthy of someone who had just become the valedictorian. Gatsby continued praising the prestige of the Gale Sword Platoon, claiming that even receiving a chance to take the test was difficult. Before he could continue, another voice interrupted him, mocking the Gale Sword Platoon as a bunch of fools. A woman carrying a massive greatsword stepped forward and greeted Theo respectfully. She introduced herself as Ayan Sasori, the Fire Goblin and Vice Commander of the Black Iron Cavalry. Unlike Gatsby, she had not come with an examination offer. Instead, she directly invited Theo to join her organization. The sudden appearance of the Fire Goblin immediately shook Gatsby. Anyone familiar with her reputation knew better than to provoke her. However, before Ayen could continue, several more hidden scouts emerged from the shadows. Fearing that Theo might be recruited before they had a chance to approach him, representatives from numerous factions rushed forward with increasingly absurd proposals. The Black Sword Platoon promised to make him a squad leader within 3 years. The Swords of Law and the Security Bureau also entered the bidding war. What should have been a professional recruitment effort quickly devolved into a chaotic argument. Instead of highlighting the benefits of joining their organizations, they were too busy insulting each other. Theo simply watched from the side, amused by the chaos. He decided the smartest move would be to quietly leave before anyone could drag him further into the nonsense. Unfortunately, his escape plan was interrupted. Pink plum blossom petals suddenly drifted through the air, filling the area with a beautiful, yet oppressive presence. A single, elegant voice instantly silenced every scout. Even before anyone turned around, they knew exactly who had arrived. The newcomer casually admitted that some people would probably criticize her greed, but she could not help herself when faced with such extraordinary talent. Standing among the falling petals was Osa Ragnar Prunis, the Sword Dragon and Lady of the Plum Blossom Palace. Her appearance stunned everyone present. Even Ayen was shocked enough to question why the clan head's first wife had personally come to such a place. Osa calmly explained that her purpose was exactly the same as everyone else's. She had come personally to see Theo Ragnar. The fact that someone of her status was willing to participate in the recruitment battle demonstrated just how valuable Theo had become in the eyes of the clan's elite. While Theo found himself trapped in this absurd competition for his future, the newly crowned salutatorian was dealing with his frustrations in a much darker way. Calling Axion a sore loser would have been an understatement. Consumed by rage after losing first place, he vented his anger by slaughtering his own men. Young swordsmen who believed they were merely participating in training exercises found themselves cut down one after another. Axion moved through them mercilessly, treating them like disposable practice targets. Every slash was fueled by his hatred toward Theo. He could not stop thinking about the banquet of the Scaled Dragon Society, where Theo left him humiliated and maimed. He could not forget the overwhelming draconic aura Theo displayed during the awakening ceremony. Most of all, he could not accept losing by such a tiny margin. The closer the defeat, the more it tormented him. Thoughts of killing Theo completely consumed his mind. By the end of his rampage, he had abandoned his sword altogether and resorted to far more brutal methods to release his frustration. When his rage finally subsided, the training grounds were littered with the corpses of young swordsmen who had trusted their young master. Soon afterward, another figure entered the training grounds. Without even checking who it was, Axion instinctively threw his sword with deadly precision toward the newcomer's head. The weapon never reached its target. The newcomer casually caught the blade by its tip in midair. It was Ed Troyven, the Sky Dragon. He immediately berated his nephew, calling him pathetic and reminding him that murdering random subordinates would solve nothing. Once Axion realized who had arrived, he gradually calmed down. Ed advised him to stop acting on emotion and instead focus on creating a proper plan. Fortunately for him, the Sky Dragon had already begun making preparations behind the scenes. All Axion needed to do was follow the path being laid before him. Together, uncle and nephew shared the same objective. They were determined to transform the second stage of the awakening ceremony into Theo Ragnar's funeral.